Welcome, traveler. Tonight, we invite you to step gently into the past, to a time when the world you know was only beginning to take shape. Dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle, soothing hum, and allow your mind to drift as we journey together. Where are you joining from? Take a moment to imagine your city, your street, your room, and let it fade into a distant echo as we travel back to early 1776, near Boston. You awaken to the scent of wood smoke, mingling with the earthy odor of straw, sweat, and the faint, troubling tang of poor sanitation. This is the reality of a fledgling army, the army of a new nation. You may be a farmer, a fisherman, or a mere onlooker curious about the stirrings of a people rising against a mighty empire. Around you, tents and barns are crowded, men are unwashed, beards long and hair matted. Some are boys not yet 15. Others, seasoned men of 60 years, worn and scarred by a harsh life. Among the ranks, you notice Negroes and Indians, particularly in Rhode Island regiments, proving their courage as they haul, fight, and endure alongside their comrades. The camp offers moments of small comfort, though these are fleeting. Warm bread, hearty pork, cabbage, and coffee are the daily fare when the provisions allow. Yet for every meal, disease looms: camp fever, dysentery, typhus, typhoid. Latrines are little more than open pits, and the carelessness of men leaves unspeakable consequences scattered across the fields. Washing clothes, maintaining personal hygiene, and clean cooking utensils are ideals often disregarded, for laundry is deemed women's work, and the camps are largely bereft of such laborers. You see officers elected by the men, sometimes concerned with popularity more than order. Yet punishments are issued for drunkenness and minor transgressions: floggings, the wooden horse, drumming out of camp. Washington's insistence on discipline is palpable, but change is slow, and rum flows freely, sometimes a bottle a day per man, stirring temporary courage yet contributing to dissipation. Your musket is heavy, perhaps 10 pounds, flintlock, worn by years of service, yet in capable hands, it can be loaded and fired up to 4 times a minute. Many, however, lack precision, firing off powder in frivolity or frustration. Washington, newly appointed commander of this sprawling New England army, has discovered the dire scarcity of gunpowder, less than 10,000 rounds for a force numbering thousands. Supplies trickle across the ocean from Europe, precarious and uncertain. You, like many, endure the stench, the sickness, and the uncertainty. Around Boston, the British hold the sea, controlling supplies and reinforcements, while your army holds the land. General George Washington is aware, recording in January, "Many an uneasy hour when all around me are wrapped in sleep. Few people know the predicament we are in." He is a man of commanding presence, 6 feet tall, reddish-brown hair, gray-blue eyes, carrying himself with dignity, yet burdened by the enormity of the task before him. Washington's army is a patchwork of citizen soldiers. Officers distinguish themselves with ribbons, sergeants wear red cloth on their shoulders. Discipline is instilled, new rules read daily, defenses reviewed on horseback, yet the lower ranks chafe at constant orders. Among the men, remarkable individuals rise: Nathaniel Greene, self-educated, tireless, inventive; Henry Knox, a Boston bookseller turned artillery genius. These men, untested in battle, earn Washington's confidence, proving their worth as the army struggles against the hardships of siege life, insufficient artillery, and the looming threat of British reinforcements under Generals Howe, Clinton, and Burgoyne. Your place is small, yet integral, as you witness history forming under the strain of raw courage and desperate need. The Boston campaign has already tested the mettle of both sides. Bunker Hill, though officially a British victory, exacted tremendous cost, over 1,000 casualties for the Redcoats, a shocking demonstration of American resolve. By October, the wounded, sick, and destitute crowd British ships, with widows and children among them, evidence of the brutal cost of conflict. Meanwhile, in London, King George III addresses Parliament, declaring America in rebellion, pledging land, sea, and foreign mercenaries to suppress the uprising. The debate rages through the night, with figures like Edmund Burke warning of ruin. Across the ocean, the men in your camp absorb the distant drumbeat of political decision-making, their lives shaped by powers far away, yet intimately entwined with every cannon, musket, and shipment of powder that reaches Boston's frozen streets. Winter settles over Boston, bringing bitter winds and snow that crunches underfoot, chilling the very marrow of every man in the army. Supplies are scarce, firewood is precious, and tents offer little protection from the icy gusts. Yet winter also brings opportunity. Colonel Henry Knox is on the move, hauling cannon from Fort Ticonderoga across treacherous terrain, over frozen rivers, through forests blanketed in snow. The journey is arduous, men and oxen straining under the weight of heavy artillery, each mile a testament to endurance and determination. Washington watches, heartened by the slow but steady arrival of these weapons, knowing they may turn the tide of the siege. You stand among your comrades, watching the procession of cannon and carts, marveling at the ingenuity and relentless spirit of men who risk frostbite and exhaustion for the promise of freedom. Life in camp is a delicate balance of hope and despair. Soldiers huddle around feeble fires, trying to ward off frostbite and sickness, yet still they endure. The British, confined to Boston, struggle against dwindling provisions and harsh winter storms, while the Americans, though poorly clothed and underfed, maintain a vigilant blockade. Washington's mind is ever active, calculating, planning. He considers Dorchester Heights, a strategic vantage point overlooking Boston Harbor. If fortified, it could dominate the city and the British fleet alike. Under the cover of night, men work tirelessly, moving cannon, constructing earthworks, and preparing for a decisive maneuver. Every step taken is measured, deliberate, the weight of responsibility heavy on shoulders not yet accustomed to command of such magnitude. The night of March 4th arrives. A gentle, full moon casts pale light over the camp, revealing men moving silently across the frozen landscape. Oxen pull carts laden with cannon, hay, and earthworks, creaking under their load. The roar of American artillery from Roxbury and other points masks the sound of labor, concealing every movement from the British below. Reverend William Gordon, observing from a distance, whispers of Providence guiding the work, as if an invisible hand moves among the men. By first light, cannons are positioned on Dorchester Heights, their muzzles gleaming in the weak sunlight, ready to command the harbor. Washington surveys the scene, heart swelling with quiet pride, knowing that in a single night, a feat unimaginable has been achieved, a testament to courage, ingenuity, and unwavering resolve. The morning reveals the astonishment of the British commanders. Howe, surveying the heights, cannot believe the speed and scale of the fortifications. His guns cannot elevate high enough to threaten the Americans. His fleet is vulnerable. Panic spreads among the redcoats, who realize the perilous position they occupy. Orders are given to prepare an assault on Dorchester Heights, but a sudden storm rages, driving rain and hail, smashing windows, tearing through makeshift structures. 2 British transports bound for Castle Island are driven ashore. The storm, fierce and relentless, halts any assault. Washington notes, almost reverently, that Providence intervened, saving his men from potentially devastating losses. Around the camp, men whisper of fate, courage, and the invisible hand guiding their destiny, hearts beating with the quiet thrill of imminent victory. To be why March 10th, the British begin evacuation. Chaos reigns in Boston. Loyalists scramble to gather what belongings they can, fleeing aboard ships through ice-choked waters. Barrels of flour, sugar, and linens are abandoned. Spiked cannons and scuttled ships litter the streets. On the hillsides, Americans watch in awe as the enemy retreats, cheering, weeping, and singing praises to Providence. Washington, ever composed, allows General Artemas Ward, his predecessor, the honor of marching into the city first. The transition is orderly, yet tension lingers in every alley and street. Buildings bear marks of hasty departure, some damaged, some left untouched. The city, though scarred, remains a symbol of endurance, a tangible victory born from patience, strategy, and unwavering courage. The siege of Boston is behind you, but the journey continues. The Continental Army prepares to move toward New York, facing longer roads, uncertain terrain, and the vast challenge of defending a city with a powerful harbor and an enemy fleet capable of overwhelming force. The march through New England is a mixture of awe and relief. Townspeople line the roads, offering food, drink, and encouragement. The army, though tired and lacking full equipment, senses momentum, a glimmer of purpose and morale after months of harsh winter and uncertainty. Washington rides at the front, surveying his men, aware that each step carries the weight of strategy, hope, and the fragile thread upon which freedom balances. Arriving in New York on April 13th, the scene is staggering. The city bustles, crowded streets reflecting a population unaccustomed to the presence of such a large military force. Defenses are incomplete, fortifications half-finished, men only partially fit for duty. Loyalist sentiment is widespread, two-thirds of property belonging to those loyal to the crown. The harbor, wide and navigable, offers strategic advantage to whoever commands the sea. Washington understands the stakes. The city must be held, not merely defended. Political judgment weighs heavily. Congress expects the army to secure New York, to maintain morale, and to project strength. Every decision carries immense risk, and every delay could mean disaster. Tensions within the army grow. Men from different colonies, speaking different languages, following different customs, struggle to cooperate. Discipline is fragile. Sickness and smallpox run rampant. Supplies are inconsistent, arms vary in quality, and morale fluctuates with each rumor from the enemy or news from home. Washington surveys the situation, recognizing the immense challenge of uniting disparate forces into a cohesive army capable of defending the city. Officers quarrel, men grumble, yet under the surface, a shared purpose pulses. The desire for independence, for a future unshackled from distant rule, binds them quietly, though the test ahead will strain every bond and every nerve to be wide. June 29th, the first signs of the British fleet appear in the distance, a forest of masts rising from Sandy Hook. Officers, telescopes in hand, report signals from Staten Island. Panic begins to ripple through the city and the army. New York, crowded and defenseless without naval power, is exposed to the largest fleet ever seen in American waters. The sound of preparations, shouts, orders, the creaking of rigging fills the air. Citizens watch from rooftops, children cling to frightened parents, and soldiers prepare, knowing that the coming days may test their courage in ways that Boston never did. Washington's mind races, calculating, planning, anticipating every possible move of the enemy, aware that the safety of the city, the army, and the revolutionary cause itself hangs in the balance. The British fleet grows daily. Ships arrive with soldiers from England, Hessian mercenaries, and additional artillery. By early July, the fleet is immense, over 120 ships, 10,000 troops, with reinforcements expected. The sheer scale overwhelms the senses. Streets are chaotic, citizens flee, loyalists attempt to assist the enemy, and Washington's officers work tirelessly to fortify positions. The Continental Army, still raw and inexperienced, faces the formidable task of defending New York under the constant threat of attack. Each day brings new challenges, maintaining discipline, ensuring supplies, training recruits, and preparing for a confrontation whose outcome could determine the fate of a fledgling nation. That on July 2, 1776, news arrives from Philadelphia. The Continental Congress has voted to declare independence from Great Britain. Spontaneous celebrations erupt across New York, echoing through crowded streets and alleyways. Officers gather in public houses, drinking in the significance of this monumental decision, their eyes alight with hope and apprehension alike. Washington receives the news with calm resolve, understanding that while independence has been declared, the real test lies ahead, defending New York against a vastly superior British force. The city's atmosphere shifts, a mixture of exhilaration and unease, as soldiers and civilians alike grasp the reality that allegiance to freedom now comes with the risk of immediate and overwhelming conflict. By July 6th, the declaration reaches New York. Officers parade through the streets, reading aloud to gathered crowds, while children cheer and women weep tears of joy and fear. Yet, the celebrations are tempered by the reality of an enemy fleet already demonstrating the vulnerability of the city. The Phoenix and Rose, British warships, cast off from Staten Island, sailing up the Hudson and signaling the strategic impossibility of holding New York without control of the sea. Alarm guns sound, citizens scramble to safety, and soldiers rush to their posts, feeling the tension between the elation of independence and the terror of immediate danger. Washington, composed yet vigilant, watches over the city, understanding that the declaration has made the stakes impossibly high. Soldiers adjust to the sudden reality of warfare on a vast scale. The streets are chaotic as supplies are moved, defenses reinforced, and artillery positioned. Cannon fire echoes through the city as British ships test the resolve of the Americans. Civilians flee into the countryside or huddle in their homes, trembling under the booming salvo of naval bombardment. Private Joseph Martin, only 15, marvels at the terrifying spectacle, finding the sound almost musical in its rhythm, yet tinged with fear. Each shot fired, each cannonball landing, reminds the men that freedom comes at a cost, and that their resolve will soon be tested as never before. The British continue to assemble, their fleet swelling with reinforcements and artillery, signaling an invasion of unprecedented scale. Washington convenes his officers, assessing the army's position. Supplies are scarce, troops are inexperienced, and the city's defenses remain incomplete. Loyalists offer intelligence to the enemy, adding further uncertainty. Despite these challenges, Washington's calm authority reassures his officers. Strategy, not panic, governs every decision. Men practice drills, rehearse artillery maneuvers, and prepare fortifications along the riverbanks. Every day brings news of enemy movements, each report increasing the tension as the men of the Continental Army ready themselves for a confrontation that may shape the course of the revolution. By mid-July, the British fleet reaches full strength. Over 120 ships, tens of thousands of troops, and seasoned Hessian mercenaries who have endured 3 months at sea. The sight of such a force strikes awe and terror into the hearts of soldiers and civilians alike. Streets overflow with onlookers, watching the red-coated soldiers disembark and set up camp. Washington's veterans, including those hardened at Boston, feel a mixture of confidence and dread, knowing that while the army has achieved remarkable victories, it faces a battle unlike any before. Discipline, courage, and the smallest spark of ingenuity will be essential if New York is to survive. The city is a hive of activity. Soldiers fortify positions, citizens pack belongings, loyalists attempt to flee, and Washington oversees every maneuver with meticulous care. General Lee, second in command, advises caution, noting the vulnerability of the city to a naval assault. Greene and Knox, experienced in artillery and logistics, supervise the placement of cannons along strategic points, aware that these few pieces of artillery may decide the fate of thousands. The Continental Army, still largely raw and untested, moves like a living organism, each man understanding that survival requires coordination, courage, and faith in the leadership guiding them through perilous days. By late July, rumors circulate of a massive landing on Staten Island. Washington orders scouts, drummers, and signalers to monitor enemy movements. Men dig trenches, erect barricades, and prepare for potential skirmishes. Civilians, many of them loyalists, flee for safety, abandoning homes, shops, and possessions. The air is thick with the smell of gunpowder, smoke, and fear. Soldiers whisper tales of Boston, recalling the siege, the harsh winter, and the miraculous evacuation of the British. They hope the same providence will guide them now, though they know the coming battle will test every ounce of their strength and courage. Early August brings more reinforcements to the British. Over 32,000 troops now gather on Staten Island, their red coats bright in the sunlight, their bayonets glinting ominously. American soldiers watch from the mainland, feeling dwarfed by the sheer scale of the enemy. Washington's officers gather to assess the threat, debating strategy, supply lines, and the possibility of retreat if the position becomes untenable. Every decision carries monumental weight. The men sense the gravity of history pressing down upon them. The defense of New York is not merely a tactical endeavor, it is the defense of a fledgling nation. Camp life becomes tense, almost unbearable. Disease spreads rapidly, dysentery and putrid fevers claim men daily. The stench of filth lingers, as sanitation measures struggle to keep pace with the sheer number of troops. Desertions increase, yet training continues, discipline is enforced, and the spirit of resistance is nurtured despite exhaustion. Soldiers witness the growing threat, understanding that their courage must not waver. Washington rides among them, observing, correcting, encouraging, his presence a reminder that leadership, steadiness, and planning may tip the balance in what seems an impossible situation. By August 12th, the British fleet swells further. Ships arrive from Halifax, bringing thousands more troops. Observers note the precision with which the British land forces on Staten Island, their efficiency a stark contrast to the disorganized American ranks. American officers scramble to adapt, distributing orders, coordinating troop movements, and securing defensive positions. Washington understands the magnitude of the challenge. The enemy's numbers, experience, and naval supremacy threaten to crush the city and shatter the Continental Army. Each passing day increases the urgency for clever strategy, careful planning, and the steadfast courage of every man under his command. Soldiers observe the enemy encampments with a mixture of awe and fear. Red coats march with perfect synchronization. Hessian grenadiers drill with relentless discipline. Observers comment on the contrast with the Continental Army, whose ranks are a mosaic of colonies, experience levels, and armaments. Yet despite these disparities, the men of Washington's army cling to the knowledge that their cause is just, that liberty is at stake, and that determination can bridge the gulf between experience and ingenuity. The coming days will demand everything: courage, ingenuity, and an unyielding belief in freedom. New recruits arrive daily, eager yet untested. Men who have never held a musket, never fired a cannon, now find themselves in the shadow of the largest military force ever assembled in the Americas. Washington trains, instructs, and inspires, understanding that the difference between victory and disaster lies not in numbers alone, but in morale, leadership, and tactical precision. Soldiers learn quickly, improvising where experience is lacking, forming bonds through shared hardship, and drawing courage from the knowledge that history is unfolding under their feet. Scouts report British movements along the coast. Signal fires, messengers on horseback, and spies among the civilians relay information. Washington and his officers deliberate, weighing risks, anticipating enemy maneuvers, and preparing contingencies. The city streets are filled with anxious citizens, men carrying supplies to fortifications, women and children fleeing towards safety, and loyalists trying desperately to assist the approaching army. Every day is a test of strategy, endurance, and the ability to maintain order under pressure, as the Continental Army braces for what promises to be its most harrowing engagement. By August 20th, the first signs of an impending landing on Long Island appear. Soldiers peer through telescopes, noting redcoats and artillery being prepared on Staten Island. Washington adjusts his forces, deploying veterans where they may have the greatest impact, training militia in defensive maneuvers, and ensuring that supplies are positioned for rapid use. The tension is palpable. Men whisper anxiously of the coming battle, recalling tales of Boston and the courage required to face an overwhelming enemy. The stakes are no longer abstract. New York itself, and the hope of a free nation, depend upon the coming days. The night of August 21st brings a terrifying storm. Lightning flashes incessantly, striking houses, trees, and, tragically, soldiers and officers alike. 10 soldiers die instantly, along with 3 officers, their bodies shattered by the raw force of nature. Men huddle in tents, listening to the deafening roar, feeling both fear and awe. Amid the chaos, Washington remains calm, understanding that courage is tested not only by the enemy but by the elements themselves. The storm, while destructive, delays British movements, buying precious time for his army to prepare for the landing that will soon come on Long Island, an event that may determine the fate of the revolution. By the morning of August 22nd, the skies clear, revealing a world transformed by the storm. The Continental Army surveys the beach below, watching the British landing unfold with terrifying efficiency. Frigates and bomb ketches swing into position along the Narrows, their heavy guns ready to support the advancing columns. American soldiers, disciplined yet nervous, hold their positions, musket barrels glinting in the sunlight. Each officer and soldier knows that the coming hours will test every lesson they have learned. The landing is unopposed at first, smooth and coordinated, a terrifying demonstration of the enemy's skill and resolve. Men whisper prayers and promises of valor to themselves, hoping to survive the ordeal ahead. At 8 o'clock, the first waves of 4,000 elite British troops step onto the sands, their formation precise, their bayonets gleaming in the morning sun. Officers shout commands, while Hessian grenadiers move with deadly efficiency. The Americans watch from the heights, a mixture of fear and awe in their eyes. The strategic importance of Long Island is immediately clear. Its control will determine the fate of New York and the security of the fledgling nation. Washington rides along the lines, checking positions, encouraging soldiers, and observing the enemy's precision with measured concern. Every man feels the gravity of the moment pressing upon him. Across the field, Pennsylvania riflemen take up concealed positions, their aim precise but their numbers insufficient to hold the line alone. Cattle and wheat fields are burned behind them to deny resources to the enemy, smoke curling into the bright morning air. Civilians watch in fear from the city, and loyalists secretly cheer from their windows. Washington continues to adjust his defenses, distributing troops where their presence might slow or repel the British advance. The tension is unbearable, a silent weight pressing on every soldier as they prepare for what may be the most decisive engagement of their lives. By noon, 15,000 fully equipped British troops and 40 artillery pieces have landed, forming a deadly line that stretches across the landscape. Their columns march inland, moving with a precision that contrasts sharply with the raw and untested Continental Army. Officers struggle to coordinate inexperienced regiments, many men bewildered by the scale and complexity of the battlefield. Washington, alert and commanding, rides from post to post, issuing orders, encouraging men, and reinforcing the notion that courage, not just numbers, will define the outcome of the coming battle. The air is thick with anticipation, each heartbeat echoing like a drum in the minds of the soldiers. Late in the afternoon, the first skirmishes erupt near Narrow's Gowanus Road. Musket fire pierces the quiet, smoke swirling above the field as Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and Delaware battalions engage the enemy. Colonel Moses Little writes his will to his son, understanding the danger of the moment. Officers ride frantically, attempting to coordinate defensive lines, while soldiers hold their positions with courage and determination. Each volley fired is a mixture of hope and fear, every step forward a test of endurance and discipline. The land itself seems to tremble beneath the weight of history unfolding. General Putnam, awakened in the pre-dawn hours of August 27th, is informed that the enemy is attacking the American right flank. Panic ripples through the ranks as men scramble to their posts. Washington issues rapid orders, reshuffling brigades to meet the advancing columns. Putnam rides to Sterling's camp, urging him to repulse the British and hold the line at all costs. Alarm guns sound, drums roll, and the atmosphere is electric with tension. Soldiers clutch muskets, eyes wide, hearts pounding, knowing that the honor and survival of their fledgling nation rest upon the courage they summon in this critical hour. Sterling's forces, numbering 1,600, take position on the heights. Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and Delaware battalions line up, prepared to meet the enemy in true English military style. The red-coated British advance steadily, colors flying, artillery bristling. Sterling holds fire until the enemy closes to 50 yards, demonstrating the discipline that Washington's leadership has instilled. The roar of musket fire breaks the tension, smoke obscuring the battlefield as men fight with bravery, inexperience, and desperation. Each soldier understands that retreat may mean death, and that courage now defines destiny. The battle intensifies as British troops press the attack. Hessian grenadiers engage fiercely, their movements precise and deadly. American soldiers fight valiantly but begin to feel the strain of inexperience and exhaustion. Officers struggle to maintain order, shouting commands over the roar of gunfire. Every man knows that the outcome may decide not only the fate of New York but the survival of the Continental Army itself. Washington rides among the troops, his presence steadying, reminding men that their courage and unity can tip the scales against overwhelming odds. Amid the chaos, casualties mount. Soldiers fall, some instantly, others crying out in pain. The stench of gunpowder mixes with sweat, blood, and fear. Officers make rapid decisions, shifting troops to plug gaps in the line and rallying men with urgent cries of patriotism and loyalty. The battle becomes a test of endurance, strategy, and willpower, with the physical and emotional weight pressing down on every soldier. Men fight not for glory alone but for the very existence of their cause, understanding that each decision, each act of courage, may shape the course of history. To be why late afternoon, the British have successfully outmaneuvered much of the American force, pressing their advantage. Washington observes from a vantage point, recognizing the severity of the situation. He issues orders for a controlled retreat, aiming to preserve the core of his army for future engagements. Officers coordinate rearguard actions, holding the enemy at bay while soldiers withdraw, maintaining discipline under extreme stress. The retreat, though tactically necessary, weighs heavily on men who have fought bravely but are forced to yield ground. Every step backward is a reminder of the challenge that lies ahead. The night falls over Long Island, and the Continental Army completes its withdrawal under a veil of darkness. The battlefield is littered with fallen men, abandoned muskets, and scattered supplies. Fires smolder where tents once stood, casting flickering shadows on exhausted faces. Soldiers huddle together for warmth, whispering prayers and reflections on the day's fierce combat. The sound of distant British campfires hums like a ghostly reminder of the enemy's proximity. Washington rides among his men, offering encouragement and reassurance, knowing that morale must remain steadfast even in the face of overwhelming odds. The moonlight reflects off damp earth, illuminating the grit and determination that still burns in the hearts of these citizen soldiers. By early morning, the retreat continues across the East River. Boats and rafts ferry men, artillery, and limited supplies, each crossing fraught with the risk of detection or disaster. Soldiers cling to their comrades, struggling against cold winds and rough waters. The river reflects the tense anticipation and unspoken fear that grips the army. Washington supervises every movement, aware that a single mistake could lead to chaos and annihilation. Behind him, the city of New York rises, its skyline a silent witness to the unfolding drama. The soldiers move steadily, hearts heavy with exhaustion yet buoyed by the knowledge that survival preserves the possibility of future victory. Once across the East River, the Continental Army reorganizes, setting up temporary fortifications and assessing the losses sustained in the Battle of Long Island. Officers count men, distribute scarce provisions, and write reports to Congress detailing the near disaster. Soldiers tend to the wounded, sharing what little medicine and comfort they can offer. The air is heavy with grief, exhaustion, and determination. Washington walks among his troops, noting bravery, resilience, and the courage of those who face the enemy without hesitation. Though the day has been a setback, it reinforces the lesson that discipline, preparation, and unity are paramount in the struggle for independence. The weeks following the battle are filled with constant vigilance. British ships patrol the harbor, their presence a looming threat. Scouts report enemy movements, and Washington studies the terrain, searching for advantages amid the chaos. Soldiers drill tirelessly, muskets raised and bayonets fixed, honing skills that will be tested again. Smallpox and other illnesses spread among the ranks, compounding the misery of already exhausted men. Supplies are scarce, yet the soldiers endure, driven by patriotism and the shared hope of freedom. Each day is a delicate balance between preparation, survival, and the ever-present danger of British assault. On Staten Island, British forces fortify their positions, establishing camps and stockpiling supplies. Red-coated troops parade through encampments, their discipline a stark contrast to the more chaotic Continental Army. Hessian mercenaries drill rigorously, their precision intimidating even seasoned observers. Loyalists cheer their presence, confident that the might of the empire will quell the rebellion. Yet, in Washington's mind, the challenge is not merely the enemy's strength but the morale of his own troops, the discipline of new recruits, and the necessity of strategic ingenuity. Every decision carries weighty consequences, affecting not only the soldiers but the fledgling nation itself. Washington convenes his generals in hastily arranged councils, discussing strategy and anticipating the enemy's next moves. Opinions clash, with some urging a defensive posture and others advocating bold action. Nathaniel Greene and Henry Knox argue tirelessly for careful preparation, while inexperienced officers wrestle with the uncertainty of command. Despite differences, a unified plan emerges: fortify key positions, protect New York, and prepare for potential evacuation if necessary. The officers leave the meeting with renewed purpose, understanding that leadership requires both courage and prudence. Outside, the city continues its uneasy bustle, citizens aware that the fate of their homes rests in the hands of the Continental Army. As July turns to August, the threat of British attack becomes imminent. From high vantage points, officers spot the enemy fleet gathering in New York Harbor, its sheer size breathtaking. Over 120 ships, bristling with cannons, anchor menacingly, their masts resembling a dense forest of pine. Troops rush to fortify positions, dig trenches, and construct makeshift redoubts. The city quivers with tension, families evacuate, and loyalists prepare to flee if necessary. Washington, observing the fleet, feels the weight of responsibility pressing on him. Every man in his army must perform, for the defense of the city and the future of independence depend on their resolve and resourcefulness. On the morning of August 12th, the British begin landing additional troops on Staten Island. Officers count men, noting the formidable presence of Hessians, redcoats, and artillery. Washington inspects the newly fortified positions, ensuring that cannon are properly emplaced and soldiers understand their orders. Drills continue under the relentless sun, muskets polished, bayonets sharpened. The army's morale is tested, but a quiet determination settles over the ranks. Soldiers whisper to each other, recalling the victory at Boston, remembering the courage that carried them through the darkest days. The stakes are higher, but so is the resolve to endure. As night falls, the city is enveloped in anxious quiet. Families shutter windows, children cling to parents, and soldiers lie in uneasy rest, listening for distant sounds of preparation and movement from the British encampments. The streets are crowded with citizens, some loyalists, some neutral, all aware that the coming days may alter the course of history. Washington rides through the city, observing the populace, offering reassurance where possible, and reflecting on the enormity of his task. He knows that the coming engagement will be decisive, that the Continental Army must hold or risk the loss of New York, a city of critical strategic and symbolic importance. By early morning of August 22nd, the British fleet begins its advance up the Hudson, signaling the start of a new phase of the campaign. Ships sail under full canvas, cannons ready to fire, soldiers prepared to land. Citizens and soldiers alike watch with a mixture of awe and fear. Washington positions his men strategically, aware that the terrain is both an advantage and a liability. Orders are shouted, positions adjusted, and every man holds his breath, knowing that the fate of New York and the very survival of the Continental Army hinge on courage, discipline, and the careful orchestration of forces. The stage is set for one of the most critical battles of the Revolutionary War. The early morning sun glints off the masts of the British fleet as it moves steadily up the Hudson, a forest of rigging and sails that casts a long shadow over New York. Soldiers on both sides peer across the water, muscles tense, hearts pounding with anticipation. Washington inspects artillery positions, ensuring each cannon is loaded, sighted, and ready. Orders are relayed from officer to officer, a network of commands stretching across hills and streets. Civilians watch from rooftops, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe, understanding that history is being written in the movements of every ship, every soldier, and every breathless pause on the battlefield. On Staten Island, British troops prepare for a full-scale landing. Hessian grenadiers stand in perfect formation, their expressions stoic, each man a product of relentless training and discipline. Red-coated soldiers ready their muskets, officers shout precise commands, and ships' cannons are carefully leveled toward the American positions. Loyalists cheer their presence, confident that the Empire will crush the fledgling rebellion. Meanwhile, across the East River, Washington watches through telescopes, noting every movement. His mind races with possibilities, plans, and contingencies. The stakes could not be higher. The city, the army, and the future of independence are all on the line. Soldiers of the Continental Army move with urgency, reinforcing positions along Brooklyn Heights and the East River. Trenches are deepened, barricades strengthened, and artillery carefully distributed to command the high ground. Officers shout instructions over the roar of the wind and the creaking of timbers, attempting to instill order among troops who are weary, inexperienced, and afraid. Each man knows that this moment may determine not only the survival of New York but the viability of the revolution itself. The air hums with tension, a silent electric charge as both sides prepare for the inevitable clash. Washington walks among his troops, observing faces drawn tight with anxiety and determination. He offers words of encouragement, reminding them of their past victories, their courage at Boston, and the duty they share as citizens of a new nation. Drums roll across the encampment, signaling preparation for engagement, while cannon crews check every mechanism, ensuring their firepower will be reliable under the stress of battle. Soldiers whisper prayers to themselves, clutching muskets and bayonets, hearts pounding with anticipation. The tension is nearly unbearable, every breath a reminder that the coming hours will test resolve, skill, and the very fabric of the Continental Army. By mid-morning, scouts report the first movement of enemy landing parties across the river. Boats packed with soldiers row steadily toward the shore, their oars cutting through the calm waters with precision. Washington issues orders for sharpshooters and artillery units to prepare for contact. Muskets are primed, cannonballs stacked, and officers assign defensive positions along the anticipated points of attack. The soldiers, though nervous, brace themselves, recalling the lessons of Bunker Hill and Boston. Each man understands that courage alone may not be enough. Coordination, strategy, and resilience will be essential to withstand the impending assault. Across the landing zone, British troops disembark with practiced efficiency. Red coats march onto the sand, Hessian grenadiers follow, and artillery units move into position to support the infantry. Officers shout commands, and the ground trembles with the weight of thousands of boots. Civilians on the shore gasp and murmur in fear, while loyalists cheer quietly from the shadows. Across the river, American troops hold their positions, muskets trained, eyes sharp, and hearts racing. The silence before the storm is punctuated by the occasional shout, the creak of timbers, and the murmur of fear and determination. The first volleys of musket fire erupt near Gowanus Road. Smoke and chaos swirl across the battlefield as American troops return fire, disciplined yet strained. Officers attempt to maintain lines and coordinate volleys, but the experience and organization of the British Army present a formidable challenge. Men fall, some instantly, others crying out in pain. The screams mix with the roar of cannon, the whistle of musket balls, and the distant clamor of drums. Each soldier feels the weight of responsibility, knowing that the fate of New York and the survival of the army depend on the courage and skill of every individual present. General Putnam, realizing the enemy has flanked part of the American lines, rides desperately to rally his troops. Soldiers scramble to adjust positions, musket fire echoing across the heights. Smoke obscures the landscape, making every movement perilous and confusing. Officers shout orders above the din, trying to restore cohesion and prevent a full collapse of the line. Amidst the chaos, acts of bravery occur. A soldier carries a wounded comrade to safety, a small group holds a crucial position against overwhelming numbers, and officers risk their lives to maintain order. The battle is fierce, relentless, and unforgiving. By late afternoon, the British have begun to press the American forces back, outmaneuvering the less experienced troops. Washington observes the unfolding disaster, issuing rapid orders for an organized retreat. The rearguard engages the enemy, buying precious time for the main body to withdraw. Soldiers fight valiantly, but exhaustion, fear, and confusion threaten to unravel the defense. Amidst smoke, blood, and thunderous musket fire, the sense of urgency is palpable. Every action, every command, and every act of courage carries consequences that could determine the future of the Continental Army and the Revolution itself. Night falls once again over Long Island, and the Continental Army completes its withdrawal across the East River under cover of darkness. Soldiers shiver in the cold, wet night, exhausted from hours of combat, yet relieved to survive. fires burn low in the distance, reflecting off the water, casting eerie shadows. Officers account for casualties, reorganize the remaining forces, and plan for the next engagement. Washington rides among his men, offering words of encouragement, quietly noting their bravery, resilience, and fortitude. The day has been a setback, but the spirit of the army endures, ready to face the battles yet to come. The morning breaks over New York, casting a pale light on a city brimming with tension. Streets are crowded with both frightened citizens and alert Continental soldiers. Washington inspects the defenses along the Brooklyn Heights and Lower Manhattan, noting the vulnerability of key positions. Cannons are checked, muskets cleaned and loaded, and the men are drilled to respond instantly to any British movements. Scouts return with news. The enemy is not resting, and their ships continue to patrol aggressively. Each American soldier feels the immense weight of responsibility. The fate of the city and the continuity of the revolution hang precariously in balance. Across the river, British forces prepare for a renewed assault. Thousands of men move with precision, their bayonets glinting in the sun. Officers shout orders, drills proceed like clockwork, and the sound of disciplined marching carries across the water. Hessians, renowned for their strict training and fearsome reputation, maintain perfect formation, ready to strike at the heart of the American defenses. Loyalists, emboldened by the overwhelming force, move cautiously through the city, offering intelligence to the invaders. Washington, observing from his vantage point, understands that the coming engagement may define the very survival of the Continental Army that in the American camps. Preparation is meticulous but exhausting. Soldiers load muskets, polish bayonets, and reinforce makeshift barricades. Officers walk among the ranks, offering encouragement and issuing instructions for every possible contingency. The men whisper to one another, sharing fears, prayers, and memories of Boston and Long Island, trying to steel themselves for the challenge ahead. Amid the tension, Washington reflects quietly, aware that the strength of his men is matched only by the enormity of the task before them. The city waits, and every moment of delay could be catastrophic. Scouts return with troubling news. The British are advancing rapidly along the Brooklyn roads, moving in multiple columns. Washington convenes a council of war, the generals debating the best course of action. Nathaniel Greene advocates careful positioning to maximize the natural terrain, while inexperienced officers push for immediate confrontation. The debate is tense, the stakes high. In the end, a decision is made to hold key positions on the heights and prepare for a controlled withdrawal if necessary. Each officer leaves with a clear understanding that leadership will require courage, patience, and the ability to make rapid decisions under immense pressure. As the day progresses, musket fire echoes across the Brooklyn Hills. British forces engage steadily, probing the American lines, while Continental soldiers respond with disciplined volleys where possible. Smoke rises in thick clouds, obscuring vision, confusing movement, and adding to the chaos. Soldiers fall, cries of pain and determination intertwining, while officers shout commands above the roar of battle. Washington rides along the lines, encouraging men, ensuring that retreats are orderly, and reinforcing the importance of holding ground where possible. The air is heavy with smoke, fear, and the smell of gunpowder, yet determination burns in the hearts of every patriot. The afternoon sees the American lines beginning to buckle under pressure. British columns push forward with disciplined precision, forcing soldiers into defensive positions. Officers rally their men, attempting to prevent panic and maintain cohesion. Small groups of troops engage in desperate skirmishes, their courage shining in the midst of chaos. Washington, observing from a vantage point, makes rapid decisions, directing reinforcements to critical points. Every action is vital, every choice weighs heavily. Soldiers understand that their performance in these moments could alter the trajectory of the entire war. As evening falls, the Continental Army executes a strategic withdrawal, moving troops across Brooklyn Heights toward the East River. The rearguard fights tirelessly, slowing British advances and protecting the retreating forces. Smoke curls over the hills as artillery fire continues, musket shots ring out, and the cries of men fill the air. Washington supervises the withdrawal personally, ensuring order is maintained despite exhaustion, fear, and mounting casualties. Each soldier clings to the hope that survival today preserves the possibility of a stronger, more disciplined force tomorrow. Under cover of darkness, the retreat continues, boats ferrying men, artillery, and limited provisions across the East River. The water is choppy, cold, and treacherous, yet discipline and courage guide every crossing. Soldiers cling to comrades, urging them forward, whispering prayers for protection, and silently mourning fallen friends. Washington oversees the operation, noting the bravery and endurance of his men. Civilians on the New York shoreline watch quietly, the flickering firelight illuminating anxious faces. The night is long, arduous, and unrelenting, but by its end, the Army has survived another perilous chapter in the fight for independence. By early morning, the soldiers regroup in Manhattan. Cannons are repositioned, trenches reinforced, and exhausted men are given brief moments to rest. Officers conduct roll calls, tallying losses, and distributing whatever meager supplies remain. Washington, ever vigilant, walks among the troops, observing morale and readiness. The city itself, scarred by the previous day's engagements, stands as a testament to the stakes of this revolution. Citizens venture cautiously into the streets, the mix of fear, curiosity, and patriotism palpable. The Army's resolve is tested, but their survival fuels determination to face the challenges ahead. Reports arrive of British plans to press further into Manhattan. Washington convenes a council, strategizing defensive lines and potential retreats. Officers debate positions, weigh terrain advantages, and consider the distribution of scarce artillery. Soldiers sharpen bayonets, clean muskets, and practice maneuvers, understanding the imminent threat. The weight of responsibility lies heavily on every commander, but a shared sense of purpose binds them. Each soldier knows the city, the army, and the revolution depend on their actions. The anticipation of battle hangs thick in the air, a tense silence preceding the storm that is yet to come. The sun rises over Manhattan, painting the city in pale shades of gold and gray. Soldiers shuffle into position, their faces smeared with grime, fatigue, and determination. Washington moves among them, giving quiet orders, observing the readiness of each unit, and noting the men who have been stretched beyond their limits. Civilians peek from behind shuttered windows, anxious to see whether their city will survive another day of combat. The British fleet remains a looming presence on the horizon, their ships' masts piercing the sky, a constant reminder that the Army faces a foe both vast and well-trained. Across the harbor, British officers strategize with precision, plotting the movements of tens of thousands of men. Redcoats march in perfect columns, Hessians adjust formations, and artillery units practice coordinated volleys. Signals are sent between ships, ensuring communication and coordination with land forces. Loyalists cheer quietly, believing the end of rebellion is near. Meanwhile, the Continental Army prepares defensive measures, reinforcing barricades, distributing ammunition, and drilling troops in defensive tactics. The first clash begins along the East River, where American sharpshooters take positions atop ridges and behind barricades. Muskets are primed, eyes sharp, and breaths held in anticipation. The British advance cautiously, aware of hidden shooters, and respond with disciplined volleys. Smoke curls into the sky, mingling with the morning fog, creating a surreal battlefield where sounds are muffled and shadows move unpredictably. Soldiers on both sides experience moments of terror and exhilaration, understanding that each engagement, each shot fired, carries consequences far beyond the immediate. General Putnam rallies his battalions on the Brooklyn Heights, his voice cutting through smoke and musket fire. Orders are shouted, troops repositioned, and artillery redirected to cover weak points. Soldiers move with urgency, though many are inexperienced and frightened. Musket balls whistle through the air, and the smell of gunpowder permeates every breath. Amidst chaos, acts of bravery shine. Soldiers carry wounded comrades, hold critical positions under fire, and execute commands with a mixture of fear and determination. Washington observes carefully, ready to intervene where the line threatens to collapse. The British push forward steadily, exploiting every gap and weakness. Hessians move with precision, redcoats with disciplined force, and artillery thunders across the heights. Americans, outnumbered and fatigued, struggle to maintain cohesion. Officers shout instructions above the din, attempting to preserve order. Soldiers fight valiantly, though exhaustion gnaws at their limbs and fear bites at their hearts. Every volley fired, every bayonet thrust, and every command given carries consequences that could tip the balance in this pivotal confrontation. By afternoon, Washington realizes the lines are faltering under the relentless assault. He issues orders for a strategic retreat, ensuring units move in coordinated fashion to prevent complete collapse. The rearguard engages the British to cover the withdrawal, buying critical time for the main forces to regroup. Smoke and chaos blanket the battlefield, and the cries of men fill the air, mixing with the roar of cannon and musket fire. Each action taken is a calculated risk, every decision a potential lifeline or disaster. Soldiers cling to discipline, courage, and the hope that survival will preserve the revolution. As dusk approaches, the retreat continues across Brooklyn Heights toward the East River. Boats ferry soldiers, artillery, and meager supplies under darkness and secrecy. The river is treacherous, cold, and filled with uncertainty. Officers supervise crossings personally, ensuring no man is left behind. Soldiers whisper prayers, offer comfort to wounded comrades, and steel themselves for the days ahead. Washington rides along the banks, noting bravery, endurance, and the critical importance of cohesion. The night is long, but by its end, the army has survived, battered but intact, ready to face the next stage of the war. Morning light reveals Manhattan scarred by prior engagements. Soldiers regroup, reinforcing positions along key streets and high points. Cannons are repositioned, muskets checked, and officers conduct roll calls, accounting for losses and injuries. Washington walks among them, observing morale and readiness, quietly acknowledging the courage and resilience displayed. Civilians cautiously emerge, witnessing the cost of war, their eyes wide with both fear and admiration. The army, though diminished, retains a spark of hope. Every action, every precaution, and every prayer is a thread in the fragile fabric of survival and resistance. Reports arrive of British forces maneuvering along multiple approaches, testing weaknesses in the American defenses. Washington convenes a council of war, weighing strategic options for holding the city or retreating further. Officers debate positions, terrain advantages, and allocation of limited resources. Soldiers sharpen bayonets, load muskets, and rehearse defensive drills, aware that the coming engagement may be decisive. Each member of the army understands that their courage, discipline, and resilience are paramount. The tension is palpable as every heartbeat carries the weight of history and the possibility of both triumph and disaster. By late afternoon, British ships advance along the river, anchoring at strategic points. Redcoats march along the shore, Hessians ready their formations, and artillery fires warning shots across the city. Civilians scramble to safety, families clutching possessions, eyes filled with terror. Continental soldiers brace for combat, hearts pounding, eyes trained on the enemy's advance. Washington, atop a vantage point, surveys the battlefield, calculating every movement, anticipating every maneuver. The city's fate and the revolution itself hang in delicate balance. Courage, strategy, and timing will determine the outcome of this crucial moment. The evening descends on Manhattan, the sky a fading canvas of purples and golds, while shadows stretch long across the streets and barricades. Continental soldiers brace themselves, cold creeping into their bones, muskets resting against shoulders, bayonets glinting in the last sunlight. Civilians cling to doorways, watching from upstairs windows, whispers of fear and hope mixing in the air. Across the river, British ships loom like iron giants, their sails catching the dying sun, masts forming a jagged forest against the horizon. Scouts report enemy movements, columns shifting like living shadows along the edges of the city, while Washington paces silently atop a ridge, absorbing the enormity of the moment. He knows the coming night may bring chaos, blood, and decisions that will echo through history. Orders are quietly whispered from officer to officer, relayed down the lines, soldiers listening, hearts hammering, yet minds focused on duty, survival, and honor. The city itself seems to hold its breath. Fires flicker in windows, the smoke mingling with evening fog, curling and twisting as if alive. Every man in the Continental Army understands the weight of the moment. Retreat, advance, hold position. Each command carries consequences far beyond the battlefield. Children cry softly in the distance. Women pray aloud. And yet, in the midst of fear, a sense of awe pervades. These streets, these barricades, these exhausted, ragged men are the cradle of a new nation. Every heartbeat counts. Every breath is a promise to persevere. Washington surveys the horizon once more, calculating, anticipating, knowing that tomorrow the city may tremble under fire, but tonight, they endure, steeled by courage, hope, and the quiet blessing of Providence. Night falls fully, the city swallowed by darkness, except for the faint glow of lanterns and fires within the American lines. Soldiers huddle in small groups, warming hands, sharing meager rations, whispering prayers and memories of home. The sounds of distant drums echo across the river, a reminder that the British are preparing, moving their vast fleet into positions that seem almost insurmountable. Washington moves from post to post, his long coat trailing behind, boots crunching on frosted ground. He speaks quietly to officers, reviewing positions, discussing fallback plans, ensuring that communication is clear, that no man is left unaware of his duty. Cannon are cleaned and checked, musket barrels polished, and powder horns inspected. Each soldier knows that the night is a fragile window of preparation. Once the dawn comes, decisions must be swift, execution precise, or chaos will reign. Outside the fortified lines, shadows move through the streets, loyalists watching, spies slipping, the unknown stirring fear among soldiers and citizens alike. The wind rustles through the city, carrying a mix of smoke, gunpowder, and the faint scent of the river. Washington pauses to look at the horizon, seeing the dark silhouettes of British warships, their presence enormous and commanding. He knows that morale, courage, and discipline will be tested like never before, and the coming hours may shape not just the city, but the destiny of the entire revolution. Soldiers whisper to each other, steadying hearts, telling stories, clinging to hope. Sleep is a luxury few will have tonight. Every moment is spent in readiness, observation, and silent prayer. The night seems endless, but they endure, bound together by duty, honor, and the invisible hand of destiny guiding their steps. The first glimmer of dawn breaks over Manhattan, casting pale light across the city streets, illuminating redcoats forming in columns along the riverbanks, Hessians moving with cold precision, their uniforms crisp, bayonets sharp, eyes trained and unflinching. Continental soldiers awaken, groggy, cold, tense, but aware that the hour of reckoning has arrived. Washington rides along the lines, observing readiness, checking on artillery placements, signaling orders with gestures, ensuring that even the most exhausted troops understand the plan. Civilians peek from windows, holding children, whispering prayers, and attempting to hide in attics and cellars. Smoke curls from makeshift fires along the barricades, mingling with the early morning mist, creating a surreal battlefield where visibility is limited and danger lurks in every shadow. Drums beat softly at first, then louder, signaling the approach of the British advance. Soldiers check muskets, tighten belts, adjust cockades, and take deep breaths to steady hearts and nerves. Every officer knows that hesitation can mean death, and every soldier understands that courage is not optional. Across the river, scouts report troop movements, artillery positions, and possible flanking maneuvers. Washington absorbs the reports, calculating strategies, shifting reserves, and preparing contingencies for retreat or counterattack. The city feels both alive and fragile, a stage for events that will echo far beyond the river, the streets, and these battered barricades. The wind carries distant cries, musket fire from scouting skirmishes, and the faint clatter of cannon wheels over cobblestones. Every sound, every shadow, every movement matters. Soldiers steel themselves, eyes sharp, ears attuned, hands gripping weapons with a mix of fear, resolve, and anticipation. History is about to unfold, and they are the actors, whether they wish it or not, caught between destiny and survival, courage and chaos. The British advance begins in earnest, columns marching with relentless precision, artillery rumbling behind, Hessians at the flanks, redcoats in perfect alignment, flags snapping in the wind, bayonets gleaming with the morning sun. Continental forces brace, hearts pounding, adrenaline surging through frozen limbs. Orders are shouted, musket fire cracks, smoke rises in thick clouds, and the air is dense with the scent of gunpowder. Officers try to maintain discipline, rallying inexperienced men who falter under pressure, encouraging them with shouts, gestures, and sometimes sheer force of presence. Civilians crouch behind walls, peeking anxiously, whispers of prayer mingling with the distant, frightening roar of battle. Washington rides along the ridge, calculating, anticipating enemy movements, shifting units, issuing critical instructions. Soldiers engage in skirmishes, firing with both caution and desperation, each shot carrying hope and risk. The noise is deafening, the fear palpable, and yet amidst the chaos, courage persists. A private steadies his trembling hands to reload, an officer risks exposure to rally fleeing men, and the artillery crews work tirelessly, sweating and straining to keep guns loaded and aimed. Every volley, every movement, every shout is part of a larger tapestry, weaving together the fragile, audacious stand of a nation fighting to survive against a vastly superior force. The battlefield becomes a blur of smoke, fire, and human determination, each man's choice potentially shifting the outcome, each breath a fragile testament to courage and will. The Continental Army fights with desperation along Brooklyn Heights. Smoke curls through the air, the smell of gunpowder and earth filling every nostril. Soldiers crouch behind makeshift barricades, muskets shaking in calloused hands, eyes wide with fear and determination. Officers dash along lines, shouting commands, rallying men who falter, offering encouragement, and sometimes stern discipline. British columns advance steadily, disciplined, coordinated, artillery booming behind them, Hessian grenadiers moving like machines, precise, deadly. Civilians peer from hidden corners, hearts pounding, children clinging to parents, whispering prayers. Every musket discharge, every cannon blast, every step forward carries consequences both immediate and lasting, shaping not just this battle but the fragile future of the fledgling nation. Washington observes, calculating, reorganizing, issuing orders with calm precision. Soldiers step into the chaos, hearts pounding, embracing courage and fear simultaneously, their loyalty and determination tested against a force unmatched in number and experience. The city watches in anxious silence, the air electric with anticipation, while shadows of death, hope, and resilience intermingle across streets, barricades, and rooftops. Amidst it all, soldiers endure, their bravery a quiet, steadfast beacon amidst the thunder and smoke, knowing that the survival of their comrades and the dreams of a nation hang upon every action, every decision, every heartbeat. By midday, the American lines are strained. Redcoats press relentlessly, artillery booms echoing across the heights, muskets cracking in rhythmic volleys, Hessians marching with exacting precision. Continental soldiers dig in, bayonets ready, bodies low to the ground, eyes locked on advancing columns. Officers move through the ranks, shouting, gesturing, instilling courage, reinforcing discipline, ensuring men do not panic. Civilians cower behind walls, whispering prayers, peeking nervously to see if the city can withstand the assault. The river glints in the sunlight, a stark reminder of escape routes and potential disaster. Washington rides along the lines, calculating distances, judging terrain, repositioning forces, and observing the morale of his men. Each decision is vital. Every order carries the weight of life and death. Soldiers reload and fire, sweat and fear mingling, muscles trembling from fatigue, but hearts steadfast. Each volley slows the enemy, each defensive position bought with courage and blood. The battlefield is chaos and order intertwined, a swirling dance of strategy, discipline, and sheer human determination. Smoke obscures vision, cannon fire shakes the earth, and cries of both wounded and brave rise above the din. Soldiers endure, motivated by freedom, by comradeship, and by the silent knowledge that history is watching, waiting for courage to triumph against overwhelming odds. Afternoon drifts into evening, yet the fighting continues. Continental soldiers struggle to hold lines, faces streaked with soot, sweat, and exhaustion. The roar of British artillery shakes the earth beneath them. Muskets fire in sharp, repetitive bursts, Hessians maneuver flawlessly, and redcoats advance methodically, overwhelming at times with sheer numbers. Officers push their men forward, shouting, pointing, correcting, inspiring. Civilians flee further into the city, clutching children and belongings, whispering prayers into the fading light. Washington rides along critical points, adjusting formations, assessing the enemy's strategy, ensuring reinforcements are sent to vulnerable sectors. Each action taken is a calculated risk, every soldier aware that retreat may mean death, and advance may mean glory or catastrophe. The battlefield is a blend of smoke, dust, human courage, and raw fear. Men fall, cries echo, cannons roar, and the rhythm of battle persists, relentless, unforgiving. Soldiers find resolve in camaraderie, in the shared hardship, in the knowledge that they fight for freedom, for family, for a vision larger than themselves. Every heartbeat matters. Every breath is weighted with responsibility. The city itself seems to shiver under the tension, aware that the outcome of this engagement will shape its streets, its people, and the fragile hope of independence. Night descends again, and the battlefield quiets, though the tension remains. Fires burn in scattered barricades, illuminating ragged soldiers checking weapons, tending to wounded comrades, whispering reassurances, and sharing quiet prayers. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and earth. Officers convene in hushed tones, reviewing the day's losses, repositioning troops, reinforcing defenses, and planning for the dawn. The British encampments across the river are visible, watchfires flickering, disciplined columns resting briefly, Hessian officers coordinating movements with precision, redcoats standing alert. Civilians navigate the streets cautiously, some offering food, water, or small comforts to soldiers. Washington rides silently along lines, observing morale, assessing fatigue, and instilling calm determination. Every man, from private to officer, understands the gravity of their situation. They are surrounded by both danger and opportunity. The night air is still, save for the distant clatter of a patrol, the occasional murmur of men, and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Soldiers huddle close, sharing stories of home, steadying themselves for another day, knowing that survival demands endurance, courage, and unwavering focus. Every shadow carries possibility, every whisper carries hope or fear, and every heartbeat is a testament to resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Dawn breaks once more, the city enveloped in pale morning light. Soldiers stretch, rub frozen limbs, and whisper prayers for strength. Across the river, British warships glisten, masts piercing the sky, flags snapping in the wind, artillery gleaming, ready for the day's engagement. Continental troops prepare defenses, artillery loaded, muskets primed, lines reinforced. Officers brief soldiers, pointing to terrain features, potential approaches, and fallback positions. Civilians watch anxiously from windows and alleys, clutching children, praying, and hoping the city will endure. The river reflects the sunlight, glinting like silver, a reminder of potential retreat or disaster. Washington rides along the lines, offering quiet encouragement, observing fatigue and bravery, calculating risks and opportunities. Every man knows that today could be decisive, shaping the course of the war and the fledgling nation. The sound of marching drums from the enemy side carries across the water, echoing off buildings, amplifying tension. Soldiers steel themselves, gripping weapons, steadying breaths, hearts beating in sync with the rhythm of history unfolding around them. Every decision, every maneuver, and every action matters, for the survival of the army and the hope of a new nation rest on courage, discipline, and unwavering determination. By mid-morning, the British launch their assault. Columns advance, disciplined and precise, artillery thundering, redcoats and Hessians moving in unison, flags flying, bayonets fixed. Continental soldiers fire in disciplined volleys, smoke and chaos filling the air. Officers shout orders, rally men, and adjust formations constantly. Civilians peek from hiding places, whispering prayers, hearts pounding with fear and hope. Washington moves along critical points, ensuring lines hold, calculating enemy strategies, directing reserves. Each volley fired is a testament to courage, each maneuver a gamble with life and history. Men fall, cries echo, cannons roar, and muskets discharge repeatedly, shaping the deadly rhythm of battle. Soldiers find courage in camaraderie, shared hardship, and belief in a cause greater than themselves. The city trembles under fire, streets echoing with chaos and determination, a tableau of bravery and human endurance. Every heartbeat carries weight, every breath is precious, every action contributes to the fragile hope of survival, freedom, and the enduring vision of a new nation rising amidst smoke, fear, and valor. The afternoon drags on, British troops pressing relentlessly. Hessians flank, redcoats advance, and artillery hammers defensive positions. Continental soldiers, weary but resolute, fire in disciplined bursts, hold barricades, and cover retreating comrades. Officers, shouting, gesturing, and inspiring, attempt to maintain order amidst chaos. Civilians watch in terrified awe, hearts clenched, children clinging to parents. Washington observes, calculating strategies, directing reserves, adjusting artillery, and issuing orders for fallback positions if necessary. The battlefield is a blur of smoke, fire, and courage. Soldiers endure fear, exhaustion, and injury, motivated by freedom, duty, and camaraderie. Every musket discharged, every bayonet thrust, every command given shapes the survival of the army and the fragile hope of a nation. Evening brings a temporary lull. Smoke drifts from smoldering barricades, mingling with fading sunlight. Soldiers tend wounded comrades, share water, pray quietly, and prepare for night vigilance. Officers discuss strategy, reposition troops, and plan for the next engagement. Across the river, British encampments glow faintly with fires, officers coordinating maneuvers, soldiers resting, but alert. Civilians cautiously move, offering small comforts, whispering prayers, and witnessing the cost of freedom. Washington rides along the lines, observing morale, fatigue, and readiness. The night stretches long, but soldiers endure, hearts steeled, courage intact, knowing survival requires vigilance, unity, and unwavering determination. Night deepens, the battlefield quiet but tense. Soldiers huddle in small groups, maintaining watch, whispering stories of home, tending to wounds, and praying for strength. Fires cast flickering shadows across barricades, illuminating the exhaustion, determination, and resilience of men who have faced overwhelming odds. Officers plan defensive positions, reinforce lines, and ensure communication. Across the river, British fires flicker, troops resting, artillery ready. The city breathes in anxious anticipation, aware that dawn will bring renewed assault. Soldiers find courage in camaraderie, shared hardship, and belief in the cause of freedom. Washington surveys lines, calculating risks, reinforcing hope. The night passes slowly, filled with vigilance, prayer, and the quiet endurance of a people determined to survive and preserve the dream of independence. Dawn breaks, the city bathed in pale light, revealing damage, smoke, and troops poised for action. Soldiers stretch, adjust weapons, and ready defenses. Across the river, British ships and columns move, signaling another day of assault. Officers brief troops, emphasizing coordination, discipline, and courage. Civilians observe cautiously, whispering prayers and offering small comforts. Washington rides along lines, assessing readiness, morale, and positioning artillery. Each soldier knows that today may determine the fate of the city and the revolution itself. The battlefield hums with anticipation, each heartbeat carrying weight, each action shaping the fragile hope of a new nation. The battle intensifies as the British press forward relentlessly. Smoke and dust swirl, musket fire cracks sharply, and cannon blasts shake the ground. Continental soldiers crouch behind earthworks, bayonets ready, faces streaked with grime, fear, and determination. Officers dash along lines, shouting orders, waving hands, ensuring formations hold, and rallying those who falter. Civilians watch from hidden corners, hearts pounding, whispering prayers for their sons, fathers, and neighbors. Washington rides silently along critical positions, eyes scanning, mind calculating, assessing fatigue and morale. Every decision weighs heavily, for a single misstep could cost lives and imperil the fledgling nation. Soldiers endure pain, exhaustion, and terror, finding courage in camaraderie, in the shared dream of freedom, and in the knowledge that they are part of something far greater than themselves. The battlefield is a chaotic symphony of smoke, fire, and human will, where bravery and fear coexist, shaping the destiny of men and the course of history to be why afternoon. Casualties mount, yet the fight continues. Redcoats advance in perfect formation, Hessians flanking, artillery booming. Continental soldiers reload and fire, bracing against fatigue, adrenaline surging through every vein. Officers shout, gesture, and physically move men into position, correcting mistakes, inspiring courage, and enforcing discipline. Civilians peer from shuttered windows, children clinging to mothers, praying silently. Washington observes carefully, issuing orders, repositioning reinforcements, and calculating the enemy's next moves. Every volley of musket fire, every cannon blast, every shouted command shapes the survival of the army and the fragile hope of a free nation. Soldiers endure, driven by loyalty, duty, and the belief that their sacrifices will echo across generations. The city quivers under the tension, streets filled with smoke, debris, and determination, as human courage meets the overwhelming power of a disciplined, professional army. As evening falls, the battlefield quiets, but tension remains taut. Fires from barricades illuminate weary, dirt-streaked faces of soldiers tending wounded comrades, whispering prayers, and sharing quiet encouragements. Officers confer in hushed tones, repositioning troops, reinforcing weak points, and planning for the coming day. Across the river, British encampments glow faintly, watchfires flickering, officers coordinating movements, troops alert but resting. Civilians cautiously move through streets, offering water, food, or comfort, silently observing the cost of freedom. Washington rides the lines, ensuring morale remains steady, fatigue managed, and positions secure. The night stretches long, filled with watchfulness, endurance, and quiet resolve. Soldiers huddle close, drawing warmth and courage from each other, aware that survival demands vigilance, discipline, and unbreakable commitment to the cause they serve. Night deepens further, the battlefield still under a tense, watchful quiet. Soldiers remain alert, maintaining positions, whispering stories of home, tending to wounds, and praying for strength. Fires flicker against earthworks, casting long shadows across determined, weary faces. Officers discuss strategy, reinforce weak points, and plan for potential surprises at dawn. Across the river, British fires twinkle faintly in the darkness, soldiers resting but ready, officers coordinating silently. Civilians remain mostly hidden, heartbeats racing with every distant noise, whispering prayers for protection and survival. Washington moves slowly along lines, evaluating readiness, instilling calm, and encouraging bravery. The night is long, demanding, and unrelenting, yet soldiers endure, their courage tested, their resolve hardened, knowing that tomorrow may bring both opportunity and catastrophe, and that the future of a nation rests upon their steadfastness in the dark hours. Dawn finally breaks on the 100th scene, the city bathed in a soft golden light, smoke still curling from barricades, remnants of the night's struggle evident everywhere. Soldiers stretch tired limbs, reload weapons, adjust uniforms, and prepare for renewed engagement. Across the river, British ships glimmer in the morning sun, masts tall, artillery ready, flags snapping in the breeze. Officers brief men, pointing out terrain, approaches, and fallback positions, emphasizing courage, discipline, and focus. Civilians watch cautiously, whispering prayers, offering small comforts, hearts heavy with hope and fear. Washington rides along the lines, observing morale, readiness, and fatigue, calculating movements, and reinforcing strategy. Every soldier knows the stakes are immense, every order carries weight, every step shapes destiny. As the city awakens to another day of uncertainty, the men brace for what history demands: courage, endurance, and the unyielding pursuit of freedom. Today, as with every day, the American Army fights not only for survival but for the very soul of a nation yet to be born. The morning of Brooklyn had been disastrous, yet the survivors moved with a grim determination, their faces streaked with mud, sweat, and tears, each step heavy with the weight of loss. The East River glistened under a pale sun, but the water was a silent witness to the chaos that had unfolded. Washington, resolute on horseback, scanned the ragged columns, noting every faltering gait, every soldier staggering under the burden of muskets, packs, and shattered morale. Orders were whispered along the line, voices carrying over the rumble of distant cannon fire, and yet every man understood the stakes. Survival was paramount, and retreat, though humiliating, had become an artful necessity. Soldiers exchanged glances, their eyes reflecting disbelief and exhaustion, but also a flicker of hope, for their commander, though harried, remained a steady presence. Across the Brooklyn Heights, the ruins of battle lay scattered, the earth scorched and cratered, a testament to the fury of musket and cannon. Dead and wounded littered the ground, Hessian soldiers moving among them with a discipline both terrifying and efficient. American troops who had survived the first onslaught found themselves scrambling toward the river, glancing back at the smoke that still drifted across the landscape. Washington's voice rose occasionally, firm and commanding, cutting through the fog of despair. Yet even he could not mask the magnitude of the calamity, the loss of life, the capture of comrades, the sight of the enemy's relentless advance. It pressed on every man's heart. Amid this chaos, the faint murmur of discipline persisted. Small groups formed, rallied by officers who clung to the hope that retreat could be executed without total annihilation. As the army converged on the ferry landing, the night's mist offered a fragile cloak of protection. Boats bobbed in the cold, dark waters, manned by Glover's sailors and local fishermen whose knowledge of currents and tides became indispensable. Washington and his generals moved among the troops, assessing, instructing, and calming, their presence a stabilizing force. Every crossing was meticulous, fraught with danger, yet carried out with near impossible precision. Soldiers, soaked to the bone, loaded artillery and wagons, their muscles aching, their hands raw from rope and mud. Amid the storm, there were fleeting moments of humor and human connection, brief exchanges of encouragement, whispered reassurances, and the steady cadence of work that kept despair at bay. The fog thickened, concealing the fragile exodus from prying eyes and advancing bayonets. By dawn, the last regiment clambered aboard the boats, the fog still heavy, the river surging with wind-driven currents. Washington lingered at the ferry, watching every boat depart, counting heads, ensuring no man was left behind. Behind him, Brooklyn Heights lay in the grip of British control, the aftermath of carnage silent except for the groans of the wounded and the occasional cannon, now firing only in inspection or demonstration. The evacuation was a miracle of coordination and courage. 9,000 men had slipped past a superior force, intact and largely unharmed. Washington's mind, however, was already on the next challenge, regrouping, fortifying, and preparing for inevitable encounters with a relentless and capable enemy. Every step forward demanded vigilance. The victory of escape was temporary, a fleeting reprieve from the relentless pressure of war. The Army's march through New Jersey was a study in endurance. Roads choked with mud, rain pounding continuously, soldiers struggled with loaded wagons, heavy artillery, and the despair that seeped into every step. The sick, the wounded, and the exhausted pressed on alongside the able-bodied, their morale a fragile thread. Washington rode at the rear of the column, observing the smallest details: the gait of men, the condition of their arms, the morale of regimental officers. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos around him. Every command, every signal, was a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. Yet the threat was never absent. Reports of British advances and potential intercepts hung over the army like a specter, pressing the urgency of movement into each step. By late November, the army had crossed the Hudson, finding temporary respite in scattered camps. Supplies were minimal, tents were absent, bedding soaked through, and rations meager. Soldiers huddled together for warmth, using whatever they could find: blankets, cloaks, and tarps, to stave off frostbite and hypothermia. Yet despite the physical discomfort, there was a quiet camaraderie among the men, an understanding born of shared hardship. Officers moved among their commands, distributing orders, offering reassurance, and quietly reprimanding lapses in discipline. The threat of desertion was ever present. The toll of previous battles weighed heavily, and the lure of home or escape to neutrality tested the loyalty of even the most steadfast. Washington's eyes, though tired, missed little. He walked among them, a living symbol of persistence and hope. Fort Lee became the next focal point, its steep rock-bound cliffs a natural fortification. Yet the enemy's approach was imminent, and intelligence reports painted a grim picture. British forces, aided by Hessians and Loyalist auxiliaries, were preparing for a landing. Washington, aware of the strategic importance, dispatched scouts and reinforcements, ordering trenches and earthworks hastily constructed. Every man understood that the coming engagement could determine the fate of the army, yet spirits were frayed by weeks of retreat and continuous hardship. Night brought little rest. The wind bit through clothing and blankets, rainwater pooled in trenches, and the distant roar of river currents seemed to echo the relentless advance of British columns. Strategy and desperation intertwined, demanding swift, decisive action. The British landing at Gloucester under cover of darkness added urgency. Glover's men once again became the backbone of river operations, ferrying troops and artillery with uncanny skill. Washington observed from vantage points, issuing commands with precision, his mind balancing risk and opportunity. Fort Lee, though fortified, was vulnerable. The steep terrain slowed some attackers but provided limited protection from disciplined volleys and coordinated maneuvers. Soldiers worked feverishly, the sound of hammering, shoveling, and musket drills mingling with the ambient roar of the river. Orders were repeated with increasing intensity: hold the ground, delay the enemy, retreat if necessary, but preserve as many lives as possible. Every decision carried the weight of potential catastrophe. As dawn approached, the British assaulted Fort Lee with a coordinated, rapid advance. Hessians scaled the cliffs with determination, artillery pounding the American positions. Men fired from behind hastily constructed earthworks, muskets cracking, bayonets ready, yet the sheer numbers of the enemy pressed them steadily backward. Officers shouted orders, rallying small units, attempting to prevent panic. Washington observed from a distance, heart pounding, knowing the stakes. Retreat, once again, loomed as the only viable option. Soldiers fought desperately, some wounded, some captured, but every man strove to slow the enemy, buying time for comrades to escape across the Hudson. The fort's fall seemed inevitable, yet courage and discipline persisted to the last moment. By midday, Fort Lee was abandoned in haste, the river crossings again a lifeline. Guns, stores, and supplies were left behind. Soldiers scrambled aboard small boats, their bodies numb from cold and exertion. The British arrived to find the fort deserted, yet the escape was nearly complete. Washington and his generals oversaw the withdrawal, ensuring no life was lost despite the chaos. The army, battered and dispirited, continued southward, their morale fragile but intact. Reports of desertion and disease added urgency to the march. The threat of collapse loomed, yet Washington's leadership, coupled with the extraordinary courage of his troops, allowed them to survive against overwhelming odds. The campaign in New York had been disastrous, yet the Continental Army endured, ready to fight another day. The army trudged southward through New Jersey, mud clinging to every boot, musket, and wagon wheel. Rain had soaked the ground, turned roads into quagmires, and sapped strength from already exhausted men. Washington, mounted on a small gray horse, rode alongside the rear guard, counting heads, checking stragglers, and quietly motivating officers to enforce order. Every mile was a struggle. Artillery sank into ruts, wagons were stalled, and soldiers' feet were wrapped in rags to prevent frostbite. Yet even in misery, there were glimpses of resilience. Groups of men helped each other across slippery inclines, whispered words of encouragement, and reminded themselves that survival, not glory, was the day's victory. At night, the army encamped along the desolate roads, using what they could for cover: fallen branches, overturned wagons, and the few tarps salvaged from earlier battles. Fires burned low, struggling against the wind and rain, casting ghostly flickers across the weary faces of soldiers. Officers patrolled silently, reprimanding disobedience and comforting the frightened. The men huddled together, sharing body heat, rationing the little food available. Washington moved among them, offering brief words, a nod, a glance, all of which communicated resolve and concern. Morale was fragile, but his presence provided the anchor that prevented collapse. Even in retreat, discipline was enforced with a firm hand tempered by empathy. Reports reached Washington of scattered desertions, some men abandoning the column for the safety of home or neutral territory. Letters from officers warned of plundering, theft, and growing disorder, yet he refused to panic. Immediate action was required. Detachments were sent to intercept deserters, enforce discipline, and recover wagons left behind. Officers were reminded of their responsibility to maintain cohesion, yet the challenge was immense. The army was physically exhausted, emotionally spent, and rapidly shrinking in size. Washington's strategy now relied on survival and careful management of every man and resource, knowing full well that any misstep could mean annihilation. Fort Lee's abandonment had been swift but necessary. Soldiers had left behind artillery, supplies, and personal effects, yet all lives were preserved. Washington watched the last boat depart, fog still hovering over the Hudson, hiding their retreat from the British who had yet to realize the fort was empty. The American troops, wet and shivering, huddled on the western shore, receiving what little food and blankets could be mustered. Officers counted heads, reassured men, and prepared for the next march. The river had become a lifeline, a fragile corridor of escape, and the skill of Glover's men in navigating the currents had prevented disaster. The march south resumed, the army moving cautiously through hostile terrain. Supplies were scarce, the wounded and sick burdened the columns, and morale was tested with each passing day. Washington emphasized strict discipline, walking among troops, correcting officers, and ensuring order. Every man knew the stakes. The army must survive, reach friendly territory, and regroup, or the revolution could collapse. Occasionally, rumors of British movements reached them, sowing tension. Soldiers moved with a mixture of fear and determination, understanding that they were the last line between independence and defeat. Encounters with local populations provided brief respite. Some residents offered food, blankets, and assistance. Others watched in wary silence, fearful of retribution from either side. Washington's staff coordinated these interactions, emphasizing the need for speed and discretion. Even minor delays could allow British forces to close in, and every precaution was taken. Officers instructed soldiers not to linger, to conserve strength, and to maintain vigilance. The army's morale was buoyed by these small acts of kindness, though they could not erase the exhaustion and constant danger pressing upon the M.E.N.At night. The column halted along the banks of small rivers and streams. Tents were minimal, fires struggled, and the rain turned camps into mud pits. Officers moved among the men, checking on the sick, consoling the frightened, and enforcing discipline. Washington rode along the lines, noting each regiment's position, ensuring rear guards remained vigilant, and silently measuring the distance between them and the enemy. Every crossing, every bridge, every ferry point was treated with caution. The army had learned the price of carelessness, and though spirits were low, determination persisted. Fortifications along the Hudson and northern New Jersey provided brief moments of respite. Washington sent detachments to scout ahead, anticipate British movements, and prepare defenses. Every decision was calculated, balancing risk against survival. The British, he knew, were determined and relentless, yet the army's survival depended on flexibility, speed, and discipline. Men worked tirelessly to repair roads, move supplies, and maintain readiness. The leadership recognized that the morale of soldiers could not be ignored. Hope, even fragile, was essential to the continuation of the campaign. The journey south continued under a cold, drenching rain. Soldiers' feet were sore, their clothing tattered, and rations scarce. Washington's eyes missed nothing, his commands precise and unwavering. Every officer was expected to maintain order, enforce discipline, and ensure the wounded and sick were not abandoned. Deserters were pursued, minor infractions punished, and the line maintained. Despite the hardships, the army moved with a quiet determination, aware that any lapse could invite disaster. The spirit of the Continental Army, though battered, remained alive, sustained by leadership and the hope that survival would eventually bring opportunity to strike again. Reports from the frontier indicated British movements toward New Jersey, and Washington knew that the army could not linger. Supplies were replenished where possible, detachments sent ahead to prepare positions, and the men were reminded of the importance of vigilance. Every bridge, every river crossing, every hilltop was examined for potential ambush or delay. Officers instilled confidence in their soldiers, emphasizing the necessity of discipline and courage. Even amid adversity, the Army's cohesion, though tested, persisted. Washington's presence inspired loyalty, his calm demeanor reassuring in the face of relentless danger, guiding the Army toward the next phase of survival. The Army advanced cautiously through narrow roads lined with dense forests. Rain-soaked earth threatened to slow their progress, yet officers kept men moving in disciplined ranks. Stragglers were gathered, wagons stuck in mud were freed with combined effort, and the wounded were carried or assisted. Washington rode among the troops, giving quiet orders, observing every detail. The men's faces were grim but determined. Each step southward was a test of endurance and resolve. Survival, not glory, was the objective, and every soldier understood the stakes of failure. Crossing a swollen river presented a new challenge. Wooden planks and makeshift rafts were used to ferry men, wagons, and artillery. Glover's sailors worked tirelessly, coordinating each crossing with precision. Soldiers held muskets above their heads to prevent water damage, and officers ensured no one fell behind. The fog hung low, obscuring the enemy's sight, giving the Americans a fragile advantage. Despite exhaustion, fear, and hunger, every crossing was completed without major loss. Discipline, vigilance, and leadership combined to prevent disaster. By evening, the Army had reached a small clearing, suitable for temporary camp. Fires were lit cautiously, smoke minimized to avoid detection. Soldiers huddled for warmth, sharing meager rations and whispered reassurances. Officers patrolled, keeping men calm and orderly. Washington surveyed the camp silently, noting the condition of troops, supplies, and morale. Every face reflected fatigue, determination, and the fear of being caught by the British. The Army was battered but still functional, a fragile thread holding the fight for independence together. A sudden report reached Washington. British scouts had been spotted several miles ahead. Immediate measures were taken. Rear guards tightened, scouts dispatched to monitor movement, and officers instructed men to prepare for rapid movement at first light. Anxiety spread quickly through the ranks, but order prevailed. Washington's calm presence reassured soldiers, instilling quiet confidence that discipline and vigilance could avert catastrophe. The Army, though worn and harried, moved as one cohesive force, proving that leadership and training could sustain morale even in dire circumstances. Nightfall brought another challenge: torrential rain and rising winds. Tents were insufficient, fires struggled to ignite, and wet muskets threatened readiness. Officers directed men to dig trenches for shelter and protect ammunition. Washington personally inspected the positions, ensuring that no gaps existed in the defenses. Soldiers clung to each other for warmth, whispering prayers and comforting the wounded. Fatigue weighed heavily, yet the Army maintained order, understanding that any lapse could allow the enemy to strike with devastating effect. Survival demanded alertness. Even in exhaustion. At dawn, scouts returned with intelligence. British forces were approaching via alternate routes, seeking to outflank the Continental Army. Washington acted immediately, deploying troops to strategic positions, reinforcing vulnerable flanks, and instructing officers to prepare for sudden engagement. Soldiers readied weapons, patched uniforms, and double-checked ammunition. Despite weariness, they obeyed commands with precision. Every man understood the stakes. The Army must remain intact, or the revolution could be lost. Leadership, discipline, and courage were paramount, and the Army responded with determination born of necessity. The march resumed through hilly terrain, rain turning paths to mud and slowing wagons. Artillery struggled to move, soldiers slipped in the muck, and exhaustion was palpable. Officers coordinated efforts to prevent delays, assigning additional men to assist with heavy loads. Washington remained alert, communicating with scouts and guiding the rear guard. Soldiers encouraged each other, sharing small acts of kindness, food, blankets, and reassurance. The army, though physically depleted, demonstrated remarkable cohesion and resilience, sustained by leadership and the shared will to survive. Encounters with local farmers and townspeople provided fleeting relief. Some offered provisions, warmth, and shelter. Others remained wary, fearful of British retaliation. Washington's staff managed interactions with care, ensuring speed and discretion while minimizing exposure. Soldiers moved cautiously through villages, maintaining order despite temptation to linger for comfort. Every hour spent safely moving south was a victory, and morale received brief boosts from these interactions. Even amid hardship, the Army's discipline allowed them to utilize small opportunities for sustenance without compromising their retreat. A sudden storm struck, turning roads into rivers of mud and forcing men to stop. Muskets were protected, wagons stabilized, and soldiers huddled under makeshift covers. Officers reinforced the importance of silence to avoid detection, and the Army endured the storm in disciplined formation. Washington moved along the lines, encouraging the sick, exhausted, and frightened. Soldiers whispered prayers, shared warmth, and steeled themselves for continued movement. Despite the relentless conditions, the Army held together, proving that leadership, courage, and mutual support could sustain them through adversity. By midday, the storm subsided, leaving a heavy fog that concealed the Army's movements. Washington seized the opportunity to advance cautiously, using the cover to avoid British observation. Scouts moved ahead, reporting terrain and potential threats. Rear guards ensured no stragglers were left behind. Soldiers pressed onward through mud and waterlogged paths, each step a test of endurance. Officers maintained order, reinforced discipline, and encouraged men to keep focus. The Continental Army, though exhausted and demoralized, continued its retreat southward with remarkable coordination, their survival dependent on vigilance, skill, and leadership. The Army reached a narrow valley, hemmed by steep hills on either side. Rain had turned the paths to slippery mud, making every step precarious. Wagons and artillery struggled to maintain pace, often requiring the combined strength of several men to move forward. Washington rode along the column, observing positions, noting delays, and providing guidance to officers. Scouts moved ahead cautiously, checking for ambushes or hidden British detachments. Soldiers gritted their teeth, enduring exhaustion, hunger, and the cold damp, motivated only by the thought of reaching safer ground. Every foot of progress was a small victory against nature and the enemy. Suddenly, a distant cannonade echoed through the valley, sending a jolt of tension through the ranks. Officers quickly organized a defensive posture, ordering men to take cover behind rocks, trees, and mud embankments. Soldiers, wet and weary, gripped their muskets tightly, hearts pounding with anxiety. Washington personally inspected the front, directing artillery placement and ensuring lines remained cohesive. Scouts confirmed the sound came from a British advance guard attempting to test the Army's position. Discipline held. Soldiers obeyed commands even as fear coursed through their ranks. The Army survived the skirmish with minimal losses. With daylight fading, the Army approached a small river crossing. Muddy banks slowed wagons and artillery, and soldiers worked in groups to drag heavy loads across. Boats and rafts were launched under strict supervision to prevent accidents. Glover's sailors coordinated every movement with precision, their expertise crucial to the Army's survival. Officers ensured soldiers remained calm, while the rear guard remained vigilant for enemy interference. Men whispered prayers, encouraged one another, and struggled against fatigue. Washington, on horseback, maintained calm authority, inspiring confidence through presence and command. By nightfall, the Army had established a temporary encampment on high ground overlooking the river. Fires were small and concealed to prevent detection. Soldiers huddled in damp blankets, sharing limited rations, tending to wounds, and whispering reassurances. Officers patrolled continuously, ensuring no one wandered or broke formation. Washington surveyed the camp silently, noting the state of men and equipment, recording what resources remained. Though spirits were low and exhaustion high, the army remained intact, a fragile thread holding together the hope of future resistance and survival against the relentless British advance. Scouts returned at dawn with troubling news. British forces had discovered alternate routes and could potentially cut off the army's retreat. Immediate measures were taken. Troops were redeployed, flanks reinforced, and skirmishers sent ahead to observe the terrain. Soldiers prepared muskets and bayonets, checked ammunition, and strengthened makeshift barricades. Washington moved along the line, issuing quiet but firm instructions. Despite fear and fatigue, the army responded with precision. Each soldier understood that delay or misstep could lead to annihilation. Discipline, leadership, and courage were tested under the shadow of encirclement. Rain returned, heavy and relentless, soaking men to the bone and turning the roads into quagmires. Muskets and ammunition risked becoming useless, wagons bogged down in mud, and movement slowed to a crawl. Officers encouraged soldiers to keep pace, assisting those unable to continue unaided. Washington personally inspected key points along the line, ensuring no critical position was neglected. Soldiers whispered prayers, shared warmth, and supported one another through fatigue. The army's cohesion, maintained through careful leadership, proved vital. Survival more than combat was the primary objective under such punishing conditions. Crossing another river, the army faced treacherous currents and limited visibility. Boats and rafts, manned by skilled sailors, ferried soldiers, artillery, and wagons under strict supervision. Each crossing demanded coordination, strength, and vigilance. Soldiers held weapons above water to prevent damage and ensured the wounded crossed safely. Fog concealed movements, providing a temporary advantage. Officers disciplined any who slowed the operation. Washington monitored each crossing, balancing urgency with safety. The army, despite exhaustion and adversity, maintained formation and discipline, moving steadily toward the relative safety of New Jersey territory. The army halted briefly on a high ridge to regroup. Soldiers took what little shelter could be found, tending to the sick and wounded. Officers organized supply distribution, ensured muskets were clean and ready, and reinforced morale with quiet encouragement. Washington walked among the ranks, assessing each unit's condition. Despite the harsh weather, fatigue, and fear, the army maintained cohesion. Every soldier understood the stakes. Retreat was essential, but survival demanded order, vigilance, and discipline. The men prepared to resume their march at first light, hearts heavy yet determined to evade capture and continue the fight. Dawn brought partial clearing of the storm, but mud, swollen streams, and lingering fog complicated progress. Scouts reported possible enemy movements on flanking routes, prompting Washington to reposition units. Artillery was carefully moved, wagons jostled over treacherous terrain, and soldiers worked in synchronized effort to maintain order. Fatigue and hunger were constant companions, yet officers ensured men remained disciplined, reminding them of the consequences of disorder. Every step forward was a small triumph. The army's survival depended on precision, coordination, and leadership, and the Continental Army pressed onward. Weary but resolute by midday, the army reached a small village for temporary respite. Limited rations were distributed, and soldiers briefly cleaned weapons and rested. Civilians offered sparse assistance, aware of the danger of British detection. Officers coordinated recovery efforts while maintaining strict control. Washington observed the operations quietly, ensuring the army remained cohesive and ready for rapid movement. Morale improved slightly with the brief reprieve, yet fatigue and fear lingered. The army, battered but still functional, prepared to continue the arduous march southward. Survival required vigilance, determination, and unbroken discipline as the army moved southward from the village. Scouts reported British patrols nearby. Officers immediately adjusted marching formations, placing advance guards and rear sentries to prevent surprise attacks. Soldiers, still weary from days of constant movement, tightened ranks and gripped muskets firmly. Washington rode along the column, issuing calm, precise orders, instilling confidence even as anxiety rippled through the men. The road ahead was narrow, muddy, and littered with obstacles. Every wagon, cannon, and soldier required careful coordination to maintain momentum while minimizing exposure to potential enemy ambushes. The army entered dense woods, providing partial cover but complicating movement. Artillery and supply wagons struggled over roots and uneven ground. Officers worked alongside soldiers to maneuver heavy equipment, maintaining cohesion under constant fatigue. The sound of dripping water, cracking branches, and distant gunfire kept tension high. Washington inspected the flanks, ensuring units were neither isolated nor exposed. Scouts and light infantry tested the terrain ahead, reporting hidden gullies and marshy sections. Soldiers whispered encouragement to one another, drawing courage from collective effort. Survival was the foremost goal, yet every movement required discipline and foresight. Rain returned in torrents, transforming trails into slippery quagmires. Soldiers slipped, mud-caked hands struggling to hold rifles and supplies. Artillery and wagons became immobile without coordinated effort from multiple men. Officers bellowed commands, reinforced by hand signals, ensuring the army moved as a single organism. Washington, soaked and shivering, maintained composure, calming nervous officers and exhausted men alike. Stragglers were assisted, not abandoned, and rear guards remained vigilant for potential British advances. The army's cohesion, tested by weather, terrain, and exhaustion, became a testament to resilience and leadership under pressure. By nightfall, the army reached a shallow river crossing, swollen from the storm. Boats, rafts, and makeshift pontoons were deployed under the supervision of Glover's expert sailors. Soldiers carried muskets overhead, shielding powder from water, while assisting wagons and artillery across. The fog made visibility nearly impossible, but the army moved silently and efficiently. Officers enforced absolute discipline, forbidding chatter or reckless behavior. Washington rode alongside the rear guard, ensuring no soldiers lagged or became isolated. Every crossing completed was a small miracle, a combination of human endurance, leadership, and maritime skill under extreme conditions. After successfully crossing, the army regrouped on the far bank. Soldiers, soaked and exhausted, huddled in meager shelters and under blankets. Officers coordinated distribution of limited rations, prioritized tending to the sick and wounded, and reinforced defensive formations. Washington conducted a silent inspection of the camp, noting gaps in readiness, supply shortages, and morale levels. Despite exhaustion and fear, the army maintained cohesion. Each man understood the stakes. Retreat was necessary, yet any lapse could invite disaster. The Continental Army, battered but intact, continued to embody perseverance under dire circumstances. Scouts reported British detachments moving along the next ridge, attempting to intercept the retreat. Officers immediately reinforced flanks, positioning small units to harass and slow the enemy while maintaining the main column's movement. Soldiers braced themselves, muskets ready, eyes scanning the tree line for glints of redcoats. Washington, riding among units, gave calm, measured orders, projecting authority to steady nerves. Every decision was critical. A single misstep could allow British forces to sever the army's retreat. Discipline, timing, and coordination determined whether survival remained possible or disaster struck. As the army advanced through marshy terrain, some wagons and artillery became stuck, forcing teams of men to push and pull relentlessly. Officers enforced teamwork, ensuring no man or unit fell behind. Washington personally assisted in organizing manpower, inspecting vulnerable points, and directing strategy under extreme conditions. Rain, wind, and fatigue compounded every challenge. Soldiers whispered prayers, shared encouragement, and silently drew courage from the disciplined example of officers. Every step taken, every wagon freed, was a triumph over nature, adversity, and the ever-present threat of enemy attack. The army approached another small village, offering temporary shelter and a chance to rest. Civilians provided minimal aid, bringing what food and warmth they could. Officers organized men into shifts to rest, tend to the wounded, and repair equipment, while maintaining vigilance against surprise attacks. Washington walked through the encampment, ensuring that no soldier shirked duty and morale remained steady. Discipline held firm despite exhaustion, wet clothing, and hunger. Soldiers understood that every delay risked exposure to British forces, making even brief moments of rest both a necessity and a calculated risk. Dawn broke with heavy fog, reducing visibility to mere yards. The army resumed its march south, proceeding cautiously along narrow roads. Advance guards scouted for enemy movement, while rear guards ensured no stragglers were left behind. Artillery and wagons moved slowly, hindered by mud and uneven terrain. Officers coordinated continuous adjustments, keeping the army compact and cohesive. Soldiers, despite aching limbs and worn spirits, followed orders meticulously. Washington observed quietly, ready to intervene at any sign of disorder. Survival, coordination, and patience dictated every movement. The army reached a ridge overlooking the river below, providing a vantage point for reconnaissance. Scouts reported British activity along the opposite bank. Officers reinforced defensive positions, preparing contingencies should the enemy attempt to flank or intercept. Soldiers dug shallow trenches, fortified temporary posts, and maintained vigilance despite fatigue and adverse weather. Washington reviewed maps and positions, giving clear, concise orders. The army, though battered by relentless retreats and difficult terrain, demonstrated remarkable endurance. Each soldier's perseverance was a testament to discipline, leadership, and the will to survive against overwhelming odds. The army continued along narrow, winding roads, the sound of dripping water echoing from trees overhead. Every step required care. Mud pulled at boots, wagons stuck at unexpected intervals. Officers shouted orders, ensuring soldiers maintained formation despite exhaustion. Washington rode along the flanks, observing, giving encouragement, and correcting any disarray. Soldiers carried muskets and supplies, taking turns assisting those lagging behind. Scouts ahead reported occasional British patrols, forcing units to change routes, sometimes doubling back. Discipline, coordination, and constant vigilance were critical to avoid disaster as the army pressed on. By mid-morning, the army entered a shallow valley, the river beyond glinting under sparse sunlight breaking through clouds. Officers organized positions for a temporary halt, using terrain for cover. Soldiers spread out to rest while keeping muskets ready. Artillery teams worked tirelessly to clean and reload cannons, ensuring readiness. Washington conferred with senior officers, discussing possible enemy movements. The army's morale wavered, yet the presence of experienced leaders reassured the men. Every soldier understood that the slightest lapse could invite a British ambush, making even short rests a delicate balance between recovery and vigilance. Rain returned with renewed intensity, turning paths into streams of mud. Soldiers struggled to pull wagons, pushing with all their strength while officers coordinated manpower. Musket powder was protected under oilskin, and food rations were distributed sparingly. Washington rode slowly through the ranks, speaking briefly to officers, encouraging troops, and observing the terrain for potential hazards. Scouts reported British forces on a ridge nearby, forcing adjustments to marching order. Soldiers braced against the cold, soaking clothing clinging to their bodies. The combination of fatigue, weather, and enemy threat made each mile an exhausting challenge, demanding discipline, endurance, and trust in leadership. The army arrived at a small clearing, a temporary respite from dense woods. Officers organized defensive positions, digging shallow entrenchments and ensuring artillery was ready to fire if approached. Soldiers, exhausted and wet, huddled for warmth but remained alert. Washington consulted maps with senior officers, planning the next movement. Scouts were sent to survey the surrounding terrain, reporting muddy crossings, hidden gullies, and possible enemy positions. Communication among units was critical. Signals were rehearsed for quick response. Every movement, every decision, balanced the need for speed against the necessity of safety, ensuring survival in treacherous conditions. Fog settled over the landscape, reducing visibility to mere yards. The army advanced cautiously along a narrow road, scouts leading with muskets ready. Officers maintained strict control over ranks, ensuring no soldier fell behind or became separated. Wagons and artillery creaked as men pushed them through mud, coordinated effort preventing collapse. Washington inspected the rear guard personally, reinforcing discipline and boosting morale. Every soldier understood the stakes. A single misstep could lead to capture or death. The combination of environmental hazards, enemy proximity, and logistical challenges made the retreat a continuous exercise in vigilance and endurance. Approaching a small river crossing, the army encountered swollen waters. Boats and rafts were deployed with precision under Glover's supervision. Soldiers carried muskets overhead, while teams of men pushed artillery and wagons onto floating vessels. Visibility remained poor due to fog, and strict silence was maintained to avoid detection. Washington coordinated crossings, ensuring units remained intact and no one was left behind. Each successful transport across the river was a calculated risk overcome through teamwork, skill, and discipline. The army moved like a single organism, blending caution with efficiency to ensure survival against overwhelming odds. Once across, the army regrouped on a higher bank, allowing temporary rest. Officers assessed the condition of men, equipment, and artillery, redistributing supplies where needed. Soldiers huddled under makeshift coverings, drying wet clothing and tending minor injuries. Washington walked the perimeter, speaking to officers and men alike, emphasizing continued vigilance. Scouts remained deployed, monitoring potential enemy movements. The army's cohesion, though stretched by exhaustion and harsh weather, remained intact. Every action, rest, resupply, reconnaissance, was deliberate, reinforcing survival and readiness for the next phase of retreat. Scouts reported British detachments maneuvering on nearby ridges, threatening to flank the retreating army. Officers quickly reinforced vulnerable positions, deploying small units to delay or harass the enemy. Soldiers prepared muskets, dug shallow foxholes, and set up temporary barriers. Washington rode along the front, issuing orders calmly but firmly, instilling confidence amidst tension. Every soldier was acutely aware that any lapse could invite disaster. Coordination, timing, and discipline were paramount. Even the smallest misstep could allow the enemy to disrupt the column, forcing an engagement under unfavorable conditions. The army pushed through swampy terrain, wagons and artillery becoming mired in mud. Teams of men worked tirelessly, with officers coordinating efforts and ensuring soldiers assisted one another. Muskets remained ready, powder kept dry despite torrential rain. Washington supervised personally, reinforcing leadership and morale. Stragglers received aid, never abandoned. The combination of physical exertion, exposure, and proximity to enemy patrols tested endurance to the limit. Soldiers whispered encouragement to one another, drawing strength from collective determination. Every mile was a testament to discipline, perseverance, and coordinated leadership. Night fell over the village with oppressive darkness, broken only by the faint glow of lanterns and campfires. Soldiers dug shallow trenches for rest, keeping muskets within reach. Rain dripped through foliage, soaking tents and blankets. Washington moved quietly among the ranks, assessing morale, speaking to weary officers, and reinforcing orders for early morning departure. Scouts reported intermittent enemy patrols in the distance, keeping the army on edge. Every soldier understood the need for vigilance. Even minor negligence could allow the British to strike. Silence pervaded, punctuated by the occasional splash of water or the rustle of boots in mud. Before dawn, the army prepared for movement, breaking camp with minimal noise. Officers checked formations, ensured all soldiers were accounted for, and coordinated artillery placement. Soldiers carried heavy packs, adjusting for wet clothing, while wagons were loaded and pushed through mud-choked roads. Washington rode along, issuing precise instructions, emphasizing stealth and speed. Scouts were dispatched to survey routes ahead, reporting hazards and potential enemy positions. Every action was meticulous, balancing urgency with caution, as the army pressed on through difficult terrain with constant awareness of enemy proximity. The army descended a steep incline toward a narrow valley, waterlogged from recent rains. Soldiers struggled to maintain footing, helping one another through slippery ground. Cannons and wagons threatened to tip, requiring precise coordination to prevent losses. Washington supervised crossings personally, offering guidance and encouragement. Scouts moved ahead to detect enemy movements, while officers ensured that rear guards remained alert to any threat from pursuing British detachments. The retreat remained orderly despite exhaustion and poor weather, highlighting discipline, leadership, and the collective resolve of soldiers facing overwhelming adversity. By late afternoon, the army reached a modest village offering temporary shelter. Civilians brought what meager supplies they could spare: bread, water, and blankets. Officers organized units for brief rest, tending to the wounded and maintaining defensive readiness. Washington conducted a silent inspection, observing the behavior and morale of soldiers, ensuring readiness for movement at a moment's notice. Discipline remained strict. Every soldier knew the army's survival depended on maintaining cohesion and vigilance. The temporary reprieve allowed minor recovery, yet the constant threat of enemy engagement ensured tension remained high. Crossing a swollen stream, soldiers carried muskets and supplies above the churning water. Boats and makeshift rafts transported artillery with difficulty, guided by the careful direction of Glover's men. Visibility was low, with fog and mist reducing sightlines to mere yards. Officers maintained strict control, ensuring no soldier became separated. Every crossing was timed, coordinated, and monitored closely. Mistakes could result in drowning or capture. Washington inspected each landing personally, adjusting troop movements to ensure safety and cohesion. The army moved like a single organism, each individual dependent on the others for survival. Once across the stream, the army regrouped on higher ground. Soldiers were exhausted, wet, and hungry, yet morale remained intact due to careful leadership. Officers distributed rations and inspected weapons while scouts monitored surrounding terrain for enemy activity. Washington conferred with senior officers, planning the next stage of retreat while ensuring readiness against potential attacks. Every detail, from unit placement to supply distribution, was crucial. Soldiers understood the delicate balance between rest and readiness, as one misstep could allow the British to exploit weakness in the weary, overstretched columns. Scouts reported British patrols maneuvering to cut off the retreat. Officers repositioned small detachments to delay the enemy, using terrain to their advantage. Soldiers dug temporary trenches, positioned sharpshooters, and prepared artillery for rapid deployment. Washington rode along the line, issuing calm but firm orders. The army maintained strict silence to avoid alerting the enemy. Every soldier knew the importance of discipline, cohesion, and timing. Even minor mistakes could invite disaster. Coordination, vigilance, and steadfastness defined the retreat as the army navigated perilous terrain with British forces closing in. Marching through a dense forest, soldiers contended with low visibility, muddy paths, and tangled undergrowth. Wagons became mired, requiring collective effort to free them. Officers ensured that soldiers worked together efficiently, maintaining pace and formation. Muskets remained loaded and ready. Washington inspected the rear guard, reinforcing morale and providing guidance to weary soldiers. Every movement was deliberate, balancing speed with caution. The army's survival depended on cohesion and constant alertness. Exhaustion weighed heavily, but shared determination and careful leadership prevented disorder despite relentless environmental and enemy challenges. At midday, the army reached a small clearing, allowing a brief pause. Officers organized soldiers to rest without losing formation integrity. Artillery was checked, ammunition redistributed, and minor injuries tended. Washington conferred with senior officers, reviewing intelligence reports from scouts and adjusting plans accordingly. Soldiers took turns maintaining watch, ensuring continued readiness. Every decision was made with precision, as the army could not afford to be caught unprepared. Discipline, planning, and leadership were critical in these moments, providing structure and reassurance amid exhaustion, poor weather, and the constant threat of British engagement. Rain returned, turning trails into slick streams of mud. Soldiers assisted one another, pushing wagons, hauling supplies, and carrying the injured. Officers coordinated efforts, ensuring no unit lagged behind or became vulnerable. Scouts scouted ahead, reporting enemy movements and natural obstacles. Washington rode along, encouraging men, correcting errors, and ensuring lines remained intact. Every soldier understood that discipline and teamwork were the only means of survival. Progress was slow but methodical, and each mile represented a combination of strategy, endurance, and leadership that allowed the army to avoid disaster despite relentless conditions. By late afternoon, the army reached a modest hilltop offering partial shelter. Soldiers huddled beneath trees, tending to weapons and equipment while maintaining defensive positions. Washington met with senior officers, planning the next phase of the retreat while assessing troop condition. Rations were rationed carefully, and scouts remained vigilant for signs of enemy pursuit. Despite exhaustion, soldiers remained alert, recognizing the precarious balance between rest and readiness. Every decision, movement, and precaution reflected leadership, discipline, and cohesion, ensuring the army could continue its withdrawal safely through hostile territory and harsh conditions. As night descended, soldiers constructed makeshift shelters from branches and blankets. The air was damp and cold, chilling bones already weary from long marches. Officers maintained strict watch rotations, ensuring sentries were alert despite fatigue. Washington walked among the troops, checking morale, adjusting placements, and giving quiet encouragement. Scouts returned with reports of sporadic British patrols, confirming the necessity of caution. Every soldier understood the stakes. One lapse could invite disaster. The army remained disciplined, silent, and vigilant, moving like shadows through the darkness, each man acutely aware of the enemy lurking nearby. At dawn, the army resumed its march through rolling hills and muddy roads. Artillery wagons struggled through ruts, men pushed and pulled, coordinating to keep the lines moving. Officers checked units, accounted for stragglers, and ensured formations remained tight. Washington rode at the center, observing every detail, offering guidance, and reinforcing morale. Scouts scouted ahead, reporting obstacles, river crossings, and possible enemy positions. Soldiers carried supplies, weapons, and the wounded, working together in a careful rhythm. The retreat, though grueling, was executed with precision, reflecting the Army's resilience, discipline, and collective effort under relentless pressure. Crossing a narrow bridge over a swollen river, soldiers moved cautiously, fearing collapse under weight. Artillery and wagons were maneuvered slowly, while teams of men pushed from behind. Sentries remained vigilant, monitoring the far bank for British interference. Washington inspected the operation personally, adjusting timing and placement to prevent accidents. Fog and early morning mist reduced visibility, forcing officers to rely on sound and proximity. Soldiers maintained discipline, moving quietly, communicating only through gestures. Every crossing demanded precision, teamwork, and leadership, ensuring the Army avoided both natural hazards and enemy exposure while advancing through difficult terrain. The Army regrouped on a plateau beyond the river, temporarily shielded from British sight. Soldiers tended to wet clothing, rested briefly, and checked weapons. Officers reviewed troop status and ration distribution, balancing the need for rest with vigilance against possible pursuit. Scouts were sent ahead to observe enemy movements and report back. Washington consulted with senior officers, coordinating the next stage of movement while reinforcing security measures. Morale remained fragile but bolstered by the confidence in leadership. Every man understood that survival depended on careful planning, discipline, and the coordinated efforts of both officers and enlisted soldiers navigating hazardous, unpredictable conditions. Descending into a low valley, the Army encountered deep mud and waterlogged trails. Soldiers helped each other, pulling wagons free and lifting artillery pieces over obstacles. Officers maintained order, ensuring no unit fell behind or became vulnerable. Sentries at the rear monitored for pursuing British detachments. Washington personally checked difficult sections, directing traffic, encouraging weary men, and reinforcing the importance of cohesion. Scouts reported small enemy patrols, but no major attack had occurred. Every movement was deliberate, balancing the need for speed with caution. The Army progressed like a living organism, reliant on discipline, leadership, and collective effort to survive the treacherous terrain. The afternoon brought intermittent rain, soaking soldiers and supplies. Wagons became mired in mud, forcing teams to improvise with ropes and manpower. Officers coordinated efforts, ensuring orderly progress. Washington rode among the units, checking on both men and equipment, offering guidance, and maintaining calm authority. Scouts provided constant updates on terrain and enemy activity, adjusting plans accordingly. Soldiers adapted to slippery slopes, waterlogged fields, and uneven roads, understanding the importance of precision, teamwork, and alertness. The Army's cohesion allowed it to navigate hazards without major disruption, demonstrating discipline and resilience amid relentless adversity. As evening approached, the Army reached a wooded ridge offering cover and temporary respite. Soldiers set up small encampments, tending to weapons, supplies, and minor injuries. Officers maintained strict rotations for sentries to guard against surprise attacks. Washington met with senior officers to review progress and plan the next stage of movement. Scouts reported the absence of immediate enemy forces, though vigilance remained critical. Morale was tempered by fatigue and exposure, but leadership reinforced determination and focus. Every soldier understood the delicate balance between rest and readiness, and the importance of discipline, cooperation, and careful execution of orders under harrowing conditions. In the deep night, a sudden storm brought heavy rain and wind, drenching soldiers and saturating the ground. Officers ensured that lines remained intact and equipment protected as best possible. Washington moved among the men, offering encouragement and ensuring sentries maintained vigilance. Boats and supplies were checked for readiness, anticipating crossings at first light. The Army remained alert despite exhaustion, understanding that any lapse could allow the enemy to exploit weakness. Every action, from maintaining formation to protecting supplies, was executed with precision, reflecting the discipline, leadership, and collective effort essential to the Army's survival in extreme conditions. At first light, soldiers prepared to move through flooded fields and slippery hills. Artillery was cautiously maneuvered, wagons hauled through mud, and men assisted each other to maintain cohesion. Washington oversaw the operation personally, inspecting positions, adjusting movements, and reinforcing morale. Scouts reported possible enemy activity, prompting adjustments in timing and route. Every soldier remained focused, disciplined, and attentive, understanding that mistakes could be fatal. The Army advanced like a coordinated unit, relying on teamwork, planning, and leadership to navigate treacherous terrain while evading British pursuit, demonstrating extraordinary resilience and determination under severe conditions. By midday, the Army reached a small plateau, providing partial shelter and a chance to rest. Officers inspected formations, distributed rations, and ensured wounded and fatigued soldiers were supported. Washington consulted with senior officers, adjusting movements and planning for subsequent crossings and marches. Scouts returned with reports confirming limited enemy interference, though caution remained paramount. Soldiers rested briefly while maintaining readiness, understanding that discipline, vigilance, and leadership were essential for survival. Every step reflected coordination, resilience, and strategic foresight, allowing the Army to continue its retreat safely through hostile terrain and adverse weather. The Army moved again under the dim afternoon light, boots sinking into mud, wagons groaning under the weight of supplies and artillery. Officers coordinated, ensuring each regiment maintained formation while navigating the treacherous terrain. Washington rode along the lines, observing closely, issuing orders, and reinforcing morale. Scouts moved ahead, reporting every possible hazard or enemy movement. Soldiers communicated silently, their bodies instinctively responding to signals. Discipline and coordination were paramount. A single misstep could disrupt the retreat. The Army progressed methodically, balancing urgency with caution, embodying resilience and collective effort against the relentless challenges of terrain and weather. Rain fell steadily as the Army reached a narrow valley flanked by steep slopes. Water pooled in ruts, making each step a struggle. Officers supervised carefully, ensuring wagons didn't become stuck and men remained aligned in formation. Washington inspected positions, adjusting troop placement to avoid bottlenecks. Scouts returned with updates on enemy patrols, reinforcing the need for vigilance. Soldiers helped each other through the mire, lending hands and encouraging one another. Every movement, every decision, was deliberate, executed with discipline, teamwork, and coordination. Even in exhaustion, the army remained cohesive, moving like a single organism, committed to survival and the ultimate goal of evading the pursuing British. As twilight approached, the army approached a stream, swollen from recent storms. Officers assessed crossing points, sending small groups to test stability. Washington observed carefully, directing men and artillery with precision. Soldiers worked together to secure wagons, drag cannon through mud, and carry supplies across rushing waters. Scouts kept watch for enemy activity, alerting officers to any signs of movement. The men's fatigue was evident, yet discipline and leadership ensured efficiency. Every decision was critical. One misstep could endanger the army. Step by step, unit by unit, the army navigated the crossing, demonstrating resilience, coordination, and a remarkable capacity to endure under extreme conditions. The army reached a wooded hillside offering temporary cover. Soldiers quickly arranged makeshift encampments, tending to the wounded, drying wet clothing, and repairing equipment. Officers maintained strict rotations of sentries, emphasizing vigilance despite exhaustion. Washington held councils with senior officers, planning the next movement and reviewing reconnaissance reports. Scouts had observed no immediate enemy presence, but caution remained paramount. Morale was fragile but bolstered by confidence in leadership. Every man understood that survival depended on discipline, attention to orders, and coordination across all units, balancing rest with readiness in a delicate equilibrium essential for continued progress. During the night, a cold wind swept through the encampment, chilling soldiers to the bone. Officers ensured that sentries remained alert, supplies were secure, and artillery positioned safely. Washington moved among the troops, offering encouragement, checking positions, and reinforcing calm authority. Scouts patrolled silently, monitoring possible British movements. Soldiers endured discomfort and fatigue, but the cohesion of the unit, reinforced by leadership and mutual support, maintained order. Every action, from maintaining formations to tending equipment, was executed with care. The army remained disciplined, alert, and prepared to continue its retreat under the shadow of enemy pursuit and harsh environmental conditions. At dawn, soldiers prepared to move along a narrow ridge overlooking a river valley. Mud and fallen branches slowed progress, yet officers coordinated effectively to prevent disruptions. Washington rode along the columns, inspecting positions, adjusting spacing, and encouraging the men. Scouts provided reconnaissance, signaling hazards and potential enemy approaches. Artillery was maneuvered carefully, with teams of soldiers ensuring stability on slippery slopes. Every movement reflected a combination of careful planning, discipline, and teamwork. Despite fatigue, cold, and exposure, the army advanced methodically, demonstrating resilience and coordination critical for maintaining cohesion during a perilous retreat. Crossing another small stream proved challenging. Water overflowed banks, turning the path into a treacherous quagmire. Soldiers helped each other, lifting wagons, dragging artillery, and supporting the wounded. Officers coordinated the effort, adjusting troop placement to minimize risks. Washington monitored the operation, offering guidance and ensuring discipline. Scouts reported no immediate British presence, though caution remained essential. Soldiers communicated silently through gestures and signals, maintaining cohesion under extreme conditions. Step by step, the army overcame natural obstacles, demonstrating endurance, teamwork, and the leadership required to navigate treacherous terrain while evading pursuit. By midday, the army reached a rocky outcrop, providing a momentary respite. Soldiers huddled under sparse cover, tending to injuries, drying equipment, and distributing rations. Officers conducted brief inspections, ensuring readiness for continued movement. Washington consulted with senior officers, reviewing reconnaissance and adjusting the next stage of retreat. Scouts reported limited enemy activity, yet the threat of ambush remained. Morale was fragile but preserved by confidence in leadership and careful coordination. Every soldier understood the importance of vigilance, discipline, and teamwork. Progress was slow, but the army remained cohesive, moving as a united force towards safer ground. As the afternoon sun broke through clouds, Soldiers continued the march along a winding trail through dense woods. Mud, rocks, and fallen trees slowed progress. Officers ensured units remained in order, preventing gaps that could expose stragglers. Washington rode through the columns, offering guidance, adjusting formations, and encouraging the men. Scouts moved ahead, signaling potential hazards or enemy patrols. Soldiers supported one another, lifting equipment, assisting the wounded, and maintaining formation. The army moved deliberately, balancing speed with caution. Discipline, leadership, and teamwork allowed the army to progress despite exhaustion and difficult terrain, maintaining cohesion under relentless pressure. By evening, the army reached a sheltered valley with a small creek running through it. Soldiers tended to weapons, dried clothes, and checked supplies while officers ensured sentries were positioned effectively. Washington consulted with senior officers, planning the next stage of movement and reviewing reconnaissance updates. Scouts confirmed minimal enemy activity, though vigilance remained crucial. Morale was sustained by leadership, discipline, and the shared understanding that survival depended on coordination and careful execution of orders. Soldiers rested briefly while remaining alert, preparing to continue their retreat under the persistent threat of enemy pursuit and the unforgiving challenges of terrain and weather. The army resumed its march at first light, trudging along a narrow ridge with fog clinging to the ground. Officers checked unit alignment and coordinated movements to prevent congestion along the muddy path. Soldiers helped each other through deep ruts, lifting supplies, dragging cannon, and supporting the wounded. Washington rode among the men, giving instructions, reinforcing calm, and observing progress. Scouts moved ahead, noting any enemy presence or natural obstacles. Despite fatigue and exposure, the army advanced with deliberate care. Discipline, leadership, and teamwork ensured cohesion. Each soldier understood that survival depended on following orders, maintaining formation, and navigating treacherous terrain under constant threat of pursuit. By mid-morning, the army approached a dense forest, its muddy floor littered with fallen branches and slick stones. Officers directed columns to prevent stragglers from falling behind. Washington, moving along the lines, assessed troop condition, issuing guidance and encouragement. Scouts reported limited enemy activity, though vigilance remained critical. Soldiers carried supplies, dragged artillery through mud, and assisted exhausted comrades. Communication relied on signals and disciplined movement. Step by step, the army progressed, balancing speed with caution. Coordination, resilience, and leadership kept morale intact, demonstrating the collective determination of the troops to survive and maintain cohesion under relentless physical and psychological stress. Crossing a swollen stream, soldiers faced the challenge of rushing water and unstable banks. Officers supervised, ensuring wagons and cannon did not tip or become stranded. Washington inspected crossings, adjusting troop positions and providing direction. Soldiers worked together to lift and drag supplies, assist the wounded, and maintain formation. Scouts remained alert for any enemy patrols, signaling potential danger. The army's progress was slow but methodical, demonstrating endurance and teamwork. Each soldier understood the importance of discipline and cooperation. Coordination between units, attention to terrain, and the careful execution of orders ensured the retreat continued efficiently despite environmental hazards and exhaustion. By late afternoon, the army reached a small clearing, offering temporary respite. Soldiers dried clothing, tended to wounds, and redistributed rations under the watchful eyes of officers. Washington convened with senior commanders, reviewing reconnaissance reports and planning the next stage of movement. Scouts confirmed minimal enemy activity, but precaution remained vital. Soldiers remained alert, maintaining order and readiness while resting. Every decision, from positioning artillery to allocating sentries, reflected careful planning and discipline. Leadership, cohesion, and teamwork allowed the army to recover while staying prepared for immediate movement. This balance of rest and vigilance was crucial for sustaining morale and survival. As dusk settled, the army continued along a narrow, rocky path. Officers coordinated each regiment, ensuring no one became isolated in the treacherous terrain. Washington rode along the columns, observing conditions, issuing orders and reinforcing calm authority. Scouts moved silently ahead, signaling hazards and monitoring potential enemy activity. Soldiers helped one another over slippery rocks, pulled cannon through mud, and supported the fatigued. Despite extreme exhaustion, discipline and leadership kept the army cohesive. Every action reflected careful coordination, attention to orders, and teamwork. The men moved like a single organism, navigating terrain, weather, and the persistent threat of enemy pursuit with determination and resilience. Night fell, and the army set up temporary encampments in a sheltered grove. Soldiers huddled to stay warm, tended to the wounded, and checked equipment. Officers rotated sentries, ensuring vigilance despite exhaustion. Washington inspected positions, offering encouragement and reviewing plans for the next day's movement. Scouts returned with reports on nearby enemy patrols, reinforcing the need for caution. Morale was fragile, but discipline and leadership preserved order. Soldiers supported each other, maintaining readiness and cohesion. Every action, from maintaining formation to guarding supplies, emphasized teamwork and coordination. The army rested, but remained prepared for immediate movement or engagement, a delicate balance essential for survival. At dawn, soldiers prepared to advance through a narrow valley, its muddy floor and dense underbrush slowing progress. Officers ensured alignment and formation, preventing stragglers from falling behind. Washington observed closely, adjusting troop placement, issuing guidance, and bolstering morale. Scouts moved ahead, signaling potential hazards and enemy movement. Soldiers assisted one another with heavy equipment, dragged artillery through mud, and supported the exhausted. Every step demonstrated discipline, leadership, and teamwork. The army progressed deliberately, balancing urgency with caution. Cohesion remained intact, essential for survival and successful continuation of the retreat despite the challenges of terrain, weather, and fatigue. By mid-morning, the army reached a narrow bridge over a swollen creek. Officers assessed the crossing, sending small groups first to test stability. Soldiers worked together to carry supplies, drag cannon, and help wounded across safely. Washington supervised, ensuring order and providing encouragement. Scouts remained vigilant, noting any signs of enemy approach. The army's advance was methodical, reflecting careful planning, discipline, and coordination. Fatigue was evident, yet the cohesion and resilience of the troops enabled them to overcome environmental hazards and maintain progress. Leadership, teamwork, and adherence to orders were critical for navigating the treacherous crossing successfully. By afternoon, the army reached a ridge overlooking a river valley. Soldiers paused briefly, tending to wounds, drying clothing, and checking equipment. Officers ensured sentries were positioned and units remained aligned. Washington consulted with senior commanders, reviewing reconnaissance and planning next movements. Scouts confirmed limited enemy presence, though caution remained vital. Soldiers remained alert, maintaining readiness while recovering briefly. Coordination, discipline, and leadership were essential in preserving order. The army's cohesion, attention to orders, and collective endurance allowed them to navigate the difficult terrain and continue the retreat, demonstrating remarkable resilience under extreme conditions. As evening fell, the army entered a wooded valley, the ground slick with mud and debris. Soldiers maintained formation, helping each other over obstacles, lifting artillery, and supporting the wounded. Officers coordinated movements, preventing gaps and bottlenecks. Washington rode along the lines, observing conditions, issuing orders, and offering encouragement. Scouts monitored enemy activity, signaling potential danger. Despite exhaustion and exposure, the army advanced in an organized manner. Discipline, teamwork, and leadership ensured cohesion. Every step reflected careful planning and coordination. The army's determination, resilience, and adherence to orders allowed them to survive another day, successfully continuing the retreat toward safety.